Today, we dive into the lore of the Dark Brotherhood, a shadowy family whose silent blades have shaped emperors, wars, and even the whisper of the void itself. From a mournful coffin that hears every plea for vengeance to rituals that turn a single heartbeat into cosmic destiny, their story is woven with secrets older than the Empire. Follow the trail of black handprints across centuries, where every contract is a prayer and every prayer ends in hush. Now let us begin. In the violet dusk of the earliest remembered ages, before the towers of white gold and crystal sang across the horizon, there existed a quiet murmur under Nirn's restless wind, a murmur that would one day sharpen into the blade whisper of the Dark Brotherhood. The tale begins among the ancestors of the Dunmer, when they were yet Chimer, nomadic and bright-eyed, following prophets across ash-thickened coasts. In those wandering tribes, the spider-laced lessons of Mephala, the web spinner, found willing hearts. She wove secrets into campfire smoke, and her faithful learned that a silk-soft lie could strangle empires more surely than mailed fists. Assassination, in those nascent days, was neither crime nor aberration. It was sacramental art, the quiet hinge upon which clan grudges turned and vendettas reached closure without the ruin of open war. The Morag Tong grew from that communion of secrecy. Scarcely organized at first, its initiates were bound only by shared devotion to Mephala, and a cryptic arrangement of hand signs passed amid torch shadows. Their earliest killings were clan matters. A disputed heir found breathless in a sleeping fur sack. A rival mystic stilled with oil poisoned. Wine, grievances silenced before dawn, could carry them to the larger host. What set these murders apart from common bloodletting was intention. Each strike was offered up to Mephala as both worship and proof of truancy from the blunt honor codes that shackled lesser folk. Precision defined their right. Only the named target bled, and only in the sanctified manner, blade tempered in oils, throat opened from left ear to right so the whispers could escape. The ritual repeated often enough that patterns emerged, and what begins as pattern swiftly hardens into creed. When the Chimer came to settle the volcanic spine of Vardenfell, their metamorphosis into Dunmer began beneath a sky bruised by the broken promise of the tribunal. The Morag Tong adjusted, as spiders do when webs are shaken. Mephala's worship intertwined with political necessity, for the great houses of Morrowind, Hlaalu, Rethran, Drareth, and their quarrelsome kin, found the Tong services indispensable. A house poised to ascend needed daggers in the dark as surely as archers on the walls. Thus, over decades, the Tong adopted the formalities of guild structure. Contracts were etched on chitin plaques sealed in paraffin. Fees were assessed in ebony, bars or salt pearls. Sanctuaries, though they were not yet called that, took root in grottos carved beneath ancestral tombs, and there the Grandmaster presided over rites too blistering for daylight. Yet something older than Mephala slept between the heartbeats of those rituals. Sithis, the formless hiss beyond all formed things, was sensed but not named. Dunmeri mystics spoke of the void, where no Daedra even dared to tread. The scoured womb from which all possibility bleeds. To many Morag Tong assassins, that ink-soaked silence clung to every kill. It seemed each victim's last gasp was drawn, not into the lungs of Mephala, but into a deeper oblivion too vast to personify. Still, theology was less concerned than craft. The assassins rarely lingered on cosmic nuance, so long as their daggers sang true and the houses paid swiftly. Change came unannounced, born on the same hush that precedes a lethal strike. Records disagree on the exact century, though the weight of consensus points to the late middle of the First Era, some decades after the founding of the Radon Watch on Dragonstar. A Morag Tong killer known only as the Flower Unseen was commanded by her patron house to oust a rival councillor in Ebonheart. She fulfilled the contract with exemplary precision. Yet upon returning to her hidden coven, she found every fellow assassin slaughtered, strangled with their own silk garrets, or pinned to walls by ritual daggers in the shape of spiraling void glyphs. Upon the central altar sat a scroll unfurled, bearing words in fresh blood. We listen. We see. Mother bids us to embrace the void. The flower unseen sought wisdom from temple scribes, but the tribunal's monks smothered inquiry behind muttered devotions. Something had stirred beyond the spider god's weave, and the greatest powers of Morrowind pretended not to feel the tremor. Stories multiplied. In Balmora, an apprentice of the Tong vanished after claiming she heard a woman humming lullabies from the dust-choked oubliette where prisoners once knelt. In Narcissus, an entire cell of assassins broke sacred neutrality by murdering their own paymaster, screaming that the mother commanded it. Each tale ended the same. Blood pooled, lips stitched into the sign of silence, strange tokens left as if to mark a new covenant. Those tokens, a handprint smeared in ash, always upon the door, would in centuries to come be named the Black Hand. Yet in this era, they were mere forewarnings that a fracture was widening. It is at this juncture that the Night Mother first surfaces in verifiable record. The Imperial Geographical Society, collating trade manifests from Dunmerry ports, notes a rumour of the woman in the hourglass dress, who spoke lullabies to resting sailors, promising reprieve from grief if they followed her song. Half a dozen listeners drowned themselves in the inner sea within the month. Temple archivists traced similar incidents to Ashlanders wandering too near Red Mountain's bent horizon. They returned blank-eyed, repeating prayers to a dark womb beneath all worlds. Though Mephala clergy dismissed such accounts as hysteria, a schism had become inevitable. The Morag Tong's elders tightened each tenet, decreeing that no kill be offered to any entity save the web spinner. Those who felt the pull of the unnamed void found themselves watched, mistrusted, forced into missions designed to cull their numbers. Oppression does not quell faith, it distills it. Among those assassins compelled by the hush between heartbeats, informal gatherings formed in caverns where Mephala's presence felt thin. They meditated upon the void, emptying mind of self, of house loyalty, of mortal dreads, until something immense moved in that emptiness and filled them with whisper-cold purpose. The Night Mother, they said, was not a queen, but a coffin. Not a single entity, but a union of corpse and concept. She had borne children, 5 in the most cited tradition, and each child was sacrificed to Sithis so that the bride of the Nothing would forever remember the shape of loss. In exchange, Sithis granted her eternal audience. She heard every mortal's plea for blood, and through her chosen assassins, the void answered. From these meditations arose the Litany of Blood. Unlike the Tong's contracts, the litany was not purchased. It was invoked by supplication known later as the Black Sacrament. In primitive form, this rite required the petitioner to craft a crude effigy of the soon-to-be slain, fashioned of bones, nightshade petals, and a heart, animal or, in darker, tellings, stolen from a still living beggar. Over this doll, the petitioner spoke a verse. Mother of murders, child of no light, hear my plea in this hush of night. Send forth the void, let silence descend, as blade meets the flesh of my faithless friend. TTS readers centuries later would stumble over this archaic phrasing, yet the cadence mattered less than the intention. The prey was named, the Night Mother was addressed, and Sithis was courted through promise of fresh entropy. The Morag Tong leadership, upon discovering this heresy, responded with lethal efficiency. Ansei razors from Yokuda were imported, raven sharp, to sever dissent before it rooted. Cells suspected of void worship were purged under the pretext of internal discipline. What the elders misjudged was zeal. For every assassin flensed in Mephalah's name, 2 more retreated deeper into tunnels, convinced their martyrdom nourished the Night Mother's coffin womb. In hidden chambers they recited the oath of silence. We kill not for coin alone. We kill for the hush that follows. We kill so the void shall bloom. Blood ran until even Mephalah grew sated by ruin. The decisive break came, according to Dunmeri legal codices, in 1E 2920. The same fateful year, the tribune Vivek wrestled with the warrior poet Cyrus along the shores of foreign Pyandanea. Sources conflict on whether that precise date marks the Brotherhood's birth. But all agree an ultimatum was spoken beneath the ashen sky of Ald Sotha. Those who served the Night Mother would depart Morrowind under pain of open war with the Great Houses. Some accounts suggest tribunal agents secretly abetted the exodus, reasoning that a heretical splinter wandering abroad as foreign menace was preferable to civil turmoil within temple jurisdiction. Whatever the impetus, hundreds of assassins garbed in soot-black ashcloth slipped beyond the inner sea, bearing little more than curved daggers and the breathed once secrets of Mephalah's disciplines. Their crossing into the grand mosaic of Tamriel was not the triumphant march of a conquering host. It was quiet, incremental, guided by instinct as much as design. The fugitives scattered, a handful skulked through the reed-heavy marshes of Black Marsh, learning from shadow-scaled Argonian, tribes who worshipped the void in their own watery dialects. Others crept into the heartland of Cyrodiil, where the Alessian priesthood still trembled at memories of Pelinal's star-born wrath. In the Geril foothills, they found caves older than recorded time, caves whose walls bore shimmer-faint glyphs, reminiscent of the void script painted on their murdered brethren. Each shelter became a nascent sanctuary, as they would later be called. Not temples, not fortresses, but places where silence thrummed like a heartbeat. Coin was necessary, for cults unfed shrivel and die. The earliest contracts thus relied on travelers desperate enough to speak with strangers who smelled of soot and ink. A jealous merchant paid 3 ivory coins to end a rival's life and discovered the corpse within 13 hours, throat slit clean as a letter opener's ribbon. Word spread in curt whispers. There existed killers who asked no allegiance, who slew with ritual care, whose silence could not be bought by counterbribes. In this fragile epoch, the assassins still bore no unified name. They called themselves Children of the Void, Bride's Daughters, or simply the Family. Yet outsiders, lacking context, reached for comparison. They remembered merchants from Vardenfell, complaining of the Morag Tong, and so tongue-tied innkeepers described the new killers as Morag Tong outlanders, dark siblings born from the same shadow. In time, through mispronunciation and rumour, Dark Brotherhood caught root, a phrase equal parts dread and unknown, suitable for lullabies meant to hush unruly children. The cult's theology solidified in tandem with its nomenclature. For many, assassins, Mephalah remained honoured, but she became guide rather than sovereign. Sithis was rightful king of all nothingness. The Night Mother was his chosen bride and ambassador. Mephalah's stratagems offered tools, snares, misdirections, the subtle warp of rumour, but it was into the void that every soul must ultimately fall. Killing became sacrament, not solely because it served mortal politics, but because it ushered each victim back to primal emptiness, feeding the cosmic appetite. Thus, every contract fulfilled 2 hungers: the petitioner's desire for retribution and the void's endless craving to devour existence. As decades lengthened into centuries, the Brotherhood refined internal order. The 5 tenets were etched in iron tablets set within each sanctuary. Tenet 1. Never dishonour the Night Mother. Tenet 2. Never betray the Dark Brotherhood or its secrets. Tenet 3. Never disobey the word of a superior. Tenet 4. Never steal the possession of a fellow brother or sister. Tenet 5. Never kill a brother or sister. Violations invited purification. A ritual slaughter of an entire sanctuary by a silencer, hand-picked by the listener. These laws, severe yet simple, mirrored the earlier web of Mephala, but shifted emphasis from clan service to cult cohesion. It is tempting for modern scholars to view this codification as inevitable centralization. Yet early Brotherhood history shows power remained fluid. The listener, one who alone could hear the Night Mother's voice, traveled from sanctuary to sanctuary, verifying faith and selecting speakers who conveyed contracts. The identity of the first listener is lost. Some chronicles refer to him as Alisandulak, others as the Wandering Shepherd. Most agree he perished in stone-skinned Hammerfell, preaching void doctrine to Redguard sword singers, who met his words with curved steel. His lineage, however, persisted in the tradition of astral communion, whereby an assassin, kneeling before the mummified corpse of the Night Mother, enters trance and hears whispered instructions. That corpse's origin remains contested, whether it is truly the mother's mortal remains or symbolic effigy woven of ash and charred silk, but its presence anchored the cult's metaphysics. The Night Mother's sarcophagus travelled often during the Alessian reforms, when zealots scoured Cyrodiil of heretical cults. The Brotherhood smuggled her hidden coffin through sewers beneath the White Gold Tower itself, past patrols chanting Pelennal hymns. Later, amid the long years of the Doreni hegemony, the tomb rested beneath the shattered fort of Balfiera, guarded by High Rock witches who bargained longevity for the price of a single betrayal each decade. These journeys knit the disparate sanctuaries into webbed network. Even assassins who never glimpsed the listener believed that somewhere, in the hush beyond sleep, the mother's voice awaited their obedience. This faith proved resilient, for obedience rendered purpose. Purpose hardened the blade. Back in Morrowind, the Morag Tong endured as legal assassins, sanctified by the tribunal and bound to House Quorum. Their relationship with the Brotherhood settled into wary detente. Tong agents abroad sometimes aided Brotherhood cells when objectives aligned, but such alliances were transient as spider silk in Storm. Officially, the Tong denounced the Void Cult as apostates who abandoned the web spinner. Unofficially, certain grandmasters recognized that mutual rivalry preserved their contract markets. Nobles who balked at paying Tong tribute might instead employ the Brotherhood, and vice versa, ensuring perpetual demand for both. Thus the two orders formed a grisly symbiosis. Inevitably, where one struck, the shadow of the other loomed. The broader world, ignorant of theology, perceived only the expanding reach of assassination. In Calovia's fertile valleys, farmers told lantern-lit tales of a man who woke to find an ashen handprint on his stable door. He fled 3 provinces west, and still the dagger visited him one moonless eve. In Somerset's alabaster spires, Altmer scholars debated whether such killers could be bargained with to eliminate Altmer supremacist dissidents. In High Rock, lesser kings penned delicate letters to unseen speakers, trading sacks of jade drakes for unsolved deaths delivered swift. Everywhere whispers flourished, and with them, fear. Fear served the Brotherhood as coin never could, deterring those who might speak against them. Amid this ascent, cultural ramifications bubbled. Religious sects adopted counter-rites. Arcane priests in Cyrodiil introduced a vigil of the Crimson Dawn, a nightly prayer to shield faithful from the Bride of Death. Dibellan monasteries composed hymns of mercy that cast the Night Mother as tragic, widow seeking solace rather than blood, an attempt to soften her myth and thereby blunt her hold on desperate hearts. Even guilds of thieves altered methods, abandoning symbols reminiscent of blackened handprints, lest suspicion fall upon them. Thus, the Brotherhood, invisible yet omnipresent, bent societies around its outline. The world reshaped itself to accommodate the terror of unseen blades. Within sanctuaries, new generations of assassins found their way not solely through inherited dogma, but by necessity. Many were orphans, sold by slumlords to speakers in exchange for hush money. Some were fugitives, condemned for accidental killings, offered redemption through purposeful murder. Training was brutal, yet disciplined. A novice spent moon cycles, memorizing poison distillations, nightshade tinctures, crimson nirnroot reductions, the blow-dart paste of Black Marsh's ghost ribs fungus, before ever touching a dagger. Only after mastering silence of movement, stillness of breath, patience of mind, would they be granted a single contract, a test kill upon a condemned brigand or deserter left bound in some forgotten ruin. Success meant acceptance. Failure meant throat-cut purging, for dead novices reveal no secrets. The Brotherhood's rites blended cultural fragments from every province. In Hammerfell, Redguard converts introduced funeral dirges sung in Yoku meter, praising the void as the great silence beyond all songs. In Skyrim, Nord recruits carved runes on their wrists symbolizing the long night that devours suns. Claiming such marks granted favor in Sovngarde's hallowed hall through demonstration of fearless confrontation with death. Argonian shadow scales, those rare hatchlings born under the sign of the shadow, were delivered by tradition to join the Brotherhood when freed from their homeland's caste obligations, bringing marshborn stealth and an understanding of tides that move beneath. Each tradition merged, yet the Night Mother's coffin remained silent axis, her presence unified, her lullaby guided. Legends speak of those who devoutly listened to her voice across distance. One such assassin, Kirja the Hollow Reed, stalked the Emperor Regent Abnorthan's ancestor through labyrinthine catacombs beneath Imperial City, claiming the Night Mother dictated each turn. When he reached the target's chamber, he found the regent already dead. Heart burst as though frightened by an unseen spectre. Kirjar bowed to the empty air and sheathed his blade unsullied. Such stories, whether embroidered or true, cemented belief that the Brotherhood did not merely serve mortal vendettas. It enacted the deeper will of entropy itself, guiding history toward necessary void. By the closing centuries of the First Era, the Brotherhood's presence was felt in every seat of governance, from Gideon's vine-choked courts to the snow-clad holds of Winterhold. Yet its early chronicles remain curiously absent from imperial archives. Scholars attribute this to concurrent upheavals: the rise of the Alessian Order, the Durrani Chancellery Wars, the conquest of Valenwood by Cameron pretenders. Amid such tumult, a handful of surgical murders might fade into general bloodshed. Still, subtle footprints linger. Trade ledgers reveal sudden cessations of ebony shipments following the deaths of key mine barons in High Rock, deaths later linked to a single ashen handprint at each victim's estate. Temple tax rolls in Cyrodiil show abrupt donation spikes to arcane sanctums after local nobility witnessed faceless women in their bedchambers at midnight. Patterns of fear ripple outward, marking the silent walk of the Dark Brotherhood, even where ink fails to name them. Within the Brotherhood itself, doctrinal refinement continued. The void was not mere absence, but active hunger. Each contract fed that hunger. Overkilling, slaughter removed from purpose, was frowned upon, for it lacked the offered name, the sanctioned ritual. Chaos unsanctified nourished only Daedric callousness, not Sithis. Thus restraint became virtue as sharp as any blade's edge. Assassins honed patience to months, years if required, embedding themselves as servants, bards, or mendicants near, their marks until conditions ripened. When a kill finally came, it seemed inevitable, a stone at the end of its fall. Yet inevitability breeds complacency, and complacency invites fracture. Two schools of thought emerged regarding the Brotherhood's mission: the purists, who held every kill must be commanded through listener edict, in strict obedience to the Night Mother, and the opportunists, who argued that accepting lucrative contracts unaffirmed by direct whisper still served Sithis by furthering entropy. The tensions simmered, unresolved but tolerable, as gold-filled coffers and sanctuaries multiplied. For now, both factions agreed the Brotherhood's survival depended on secrecy maintained by unwavering discipline. Spies were everywhere. Imperial, inquisitors, hired Tong revengers, zealots of Archay. Discovery of one sanctuary could doom all. Thus the Brotherhood perfected the art of disappearing, leaving behind only a scattering of ash, a final hush, and a black handprint fading beneath. Morning dew, so closed the earliest epoch in the Dark Brotherhood's long twilight. From Mephalah's silken cradle, it had crawled into the world at large, guided by the distant lullaby of a mother who lay dead yet dreaming. Across continents, its unseen daggers mapped silent constellations, each point a life taken, each line a covenant between void and mortal will. The Order was still young, its future uncertainties sheathed but keen. Empires would rise, heirs would fracture, divine hearts would shatter. Through them all, the Brotherhood would endure, poised upon the edge of whisper and blood, listening always for the faintest call from the coffin. Silence lingered like a living film upon the freshly consecrated stone floors beneath the Geril, mountains where a hidden refuge pulsed with candle-red gloom and the slow echoing drip of snowmelt. Here the Dark Brotherhood gathered during the waning embers of the First Era, breathing together in reverence for the hush that followed all things. They were fewer than 20 blades then, hardly an army, less than a guild by common reckoning, but the power of their collective devotion outweighed numbers. Each sister or brother bore a dozen deaths upon the soul, deaths offered not to crown or creed, but to the unglimpsed vastness they called Sithis. Their seclusion felt impregnable, a sanctuary etched into forgotten limestone hollows, accessible only through a broken mineshaft, whose iron rails had long since rusted to dust. In their minds, this place was no mere hideout. It was the first, house of mother and void beyond Morrowind's borders, a birthplace where the old lung breath of Mephalah faded into a deeper, stranger stillness. They named it the Crypt of the Sanguine Pause, for within those halls the world's breath seemed to stop between heartbeats. Raw stone corridors wound through chambers lit by tallow lamps, whose soot blackened the ceiling in winding skeins, reminders of spider-web patterns beloved of their Dunmerry roots, yet now blurred into more formless shapes. At the crypt's heart lay a narrow alcove lined in silk, the shade of dried roses. There rested the sarcophagus that most accepted as the Night Mother's mortal shell, though its provenance was contested even then. The coffin was plain ashwood, bound by brass hoops, each hoop engraved with an unending line of jagged script that no living tongue could read without tasting copper on the teeth. Novices knelt before it nightly, drawing breath so shallow flame tips on their candles scarcely quivered. And in that fragile interval, some claimed to hear a lullaby whispered not into the ear, but into the marrow, telling them that all motion, all time, all thought would one day fold into the gentlest dark. One who listened with particular clarity was a thin, sharp-featured Breton of indeterminate years, first known simply as the Dustfoot Scribe. The listener preceding him, Alisand Dulac, had perished beneath Redguard sabres near the port of Satakalam, and for a season the cult drifted like a ship without compass, each sanctum conducting its affairs by custom rather than edict. During this interregnum, the Dustfoot Scribe transcribed every whisper that tugged the corners of his dreams. His script filled 300 pages of vellum, each line written in ink mixed with ground nightshade and a single drop of his own blood. When his meditations culminated in direct communion, so he testified, he awoke kneeling before the coffin, fingers denting the brass rim, words of an unfamiliar lullaby resting on his tongue. No one else heard the melody, yet all felt a collective thrill, a certainty that the mother had spoken again. They slid obsidian daggers across their palms, anointing his brow with mingled blood, and named him listener by unanimous consent. With a listener restored, hierarchy blossomed more formally. The Dustfoot scribe appointed 4 speakers, 1 each to Black Marsh, High Rock, Cyrodiil, and an itinerant post meant to wander the trade roads binding the Empire's loosely aligned kingdoms. Together with the listener, these 5 formed a council that assumed the sigil of a black hand, 5 fingers poised to close upon any folly. The emblem existed in rumor already, left on doors, etched in soot, but now the cult embraced it openly within sanctuary walls. 5 digits to steer, 1 palm to bind, all tinted with the void hue of eternity. Its adoption distinguished them from the Morag Tong's 8-legged spider and signaled that the sundering oath, though not yet formally uttered, already pulsed in their veins. The Morag Tong, meanwhile, had grown restive upon learning that their apostate cousins flourished abroad. Great houses Hlaalu and Dres lobbied the tribunal to sanction reprisals, arguing that the Brotherhood's existence slandered Mephalah's legacy. In response, discreet strike parties journeyed past the Velothi frontier. One such band descended upon the crypt of the Sanguine Paws in the deep of winter. They crept through the mine shaft with oil-smothered lamps, leaving no glint to betray them. Yet the Night Mother's coffin whispered to the listener even in sleep, and he roused his brethren moments before steel could flash. What followed was a battle devoid of war cries, fought in near silence, but for the hiss of drawn blades and the wet click of arterial spray upon stone. When dawn gilded the peaks outside, the intruders lay dismantled in a neat semicircle before the sarcophagus, eyes replaced by polished river pebbles, a gesture meant to deny Mephalah further witness through their dying gaze. The listener knelt, collecting the last breath of the final Morag Tong assassin with a silver file. He sealed the file, pressed it against the brass inlay of the coffin, and in that act, the sundering oath found form. Softly, in a voice hoarse from chanting, he delivered words since lost to precise record but approximated in surviving fragments. We sever now the ancient thread, forswear the spider's mortal dread. Blood calls to blood, void calls to void, by mother's hush, all oaths destroyed. Those assassins within earshot repeated the lines, scoring them into their flesh with the edge of a ritual knife. Later, copyists would refine the language, but the gist remained constant. Never again would the Brotherhood acknowledge Mephalah's primacy, nor accept the politics of house or tribunal. They were instruments only of the void and its coffin bride. That night they burned the corpses in a pit of juniper roots, inhaling smoke laced with resin so sweet and acrid it stung tears from drought-hardened eyes. Each tear, they taught, was ransom paid to memory. Each flicked spark carried a murdered oath skyward to vanish amid unblinking constellations. In the wake of this first sanctioned bloodshed against their progenitors, the Brotherhood embarked upon a campaign of silent relocation. The Gerald Refuge remained operational, but no longer hosted the Night Mother's coffin. Instead, the listener led a caravan of just 6 disciples southward through the Colovian estates, under guise of travelling thaumaturges. They bore the sarcophagus on a wagon hidden beneath burlap bales of dried lavender so pungent it masked the coffin's subtle scent of funeral oils. By the time House Hlaalu agents traced rumours to the Gerald crypt, the burial chamber lay empty, breadcrumbs swept away by a loyal necromancer who sealed the doors with a glyph that twisted tongues of the unwary into useless knots. The coffins. Destination was Cheydinhall, pronounced Cheydinhall for clarity, though the town then was little more than a ring of wooden palisades hugging the banks of the Corbelow River. Nestled between ancient oaks, whose roots knuckled through graves of Ayleid splendour, Cheydinhall sat at a crossroads trafficked by Dunmer, traders, imperial pilgrims, and Khajiiti caravans from Rimmon. This cosmopolitan blend served the Brotherhood's purposes. New faces were expected daily. Anonymity could bloom among voices of divergent accent. Beneath a half-ruined chapel Tuwa, Arche, the listener bargained with disillusioned acolytes, exchanging coils of jade drakes for keys to the crypts below. Within a week, stone masons, silenced by binding oaths and deeper threats, expanded the catacombs into a multi-level sanctuary whose halls would one day host the storied cycles of rise and fall, chronicled in later eras. There, in candlelit hollows perfumed by damp loam and fungus, the Night Mother's coffin found rest against the south wall of the central meeting chamber. Ranks of kneeling shapes in soot-black habit filed before it nightly, as the listener translated each murmured edict into mortal speech. The process carried risk. Receptivity to the mother's voice skated perilously close to madness, as the border between whispered instruction and self-born delusion remained ambiguous. To safeguard against error, the listener required his scribes to transcribe every utterance in triplicate. One copy he sealed in a lead casket and sent to the provincial speakers. The second he archived in the Chedenhall vault within a cedar chest coated in pitch. The third he burned upon an altar of carved onyx, releasing the written word back into smoke, so the mother might reclaim unintended meaning. Amid these rituals, a single petition reached the listener that would alter the Brotherhood's destiny, more drastically than any dagger thrust. The first true Black Sacrament performed beyond Morrowind. Though rudimentary forms of the rite existed, they had remained localized, half-remembered by those who walked out of Ashland exile. This instance bore new precision. A widow from the Gold Coast, grant holder of a modest sun-kissed vineyard, travelled to Kvatch's chapel of Akatosh to mourn her husband slain by a debtor's hired blades. There she whispered to a travelling alchemist of rumours that one might conjure assassins by crafting a doll of nightshade-stuffed limbs and stabbing it with a dagger encrusted with obsidian powder. The alchemist, who happened also to serve as Argus Sylvia, roaming speaker, guided her gently, providing the necessary incantation. Sweet mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear. She followed each instruction. Beside her hearth as midnight chimed thrice, the doll smoked, the dagger split its heart of funeral resin, and within 3 nights the debtor responsible for her husband's death was found face down in Cyrodiil's Lake Rumare, his lungs packed with grape leaves from her vineyard. Word of the miracle spread no further than 3 ears: the widows, the speakers, and the listeners. Yet in cloistered sanctums, scribes inked subtle amendments to Brotherhood doctrine. From that moment forward, the Black Sacrament would provide a direct bridge between petitioners and the Night Mother. Payments still flowed through speakers, logistics still demanded mortal toil, but spiritual consent now travelled an eldritch path unreachable by spies. Even if every sanctuary burned, the rite once learned could sprout anew wherever grief, vengeance, and desperation coalesced around a whispered rhyme. Standardization followed. For TTS clarity, each sanctum taught novitiates clear phonetic enunciation. Sweet mother, send your child unto me. The final couplet varied by dialect, yet always retained cadence conducive to chant. The sacrament's reagents crystallized into universal recipe: human flesh-shrouded heart, bone shards, nightshade petals, and volatile oils. In Nordlands lacking nightshade, belladonna served. In Valenwood, crushed rainfern was substituted, though with less reliable results. The effigy's construction was never to be rushed. Petitioner and target's essence must intertwine, hair, nail, or blood, woven through effigy sinew, so that the void's appetite found proper vector. Neglect any detail, and the rite degenerated into mere witchcraft, powerless to breach the mother's hush. Once the sacrament took root, contracts multiplied faster than speakers could manage. To maintain equilibrium, the listener decreed the formation of the Black Hand as a permanent governing body rather than incidental council. 4 speakers and 1 listener, comprised each hand at any given time. New sanctuaries could be opened only with unanimous approval, and each sanctuary must answer quarterly ledgers enumerating finances, recruits, and kill counts, numbers coded in glyphs that rendered to outsiders as harmless market tallies. Transgression invited purification, now codified with chilling precision. The silencer, appointed by speaker decree, would enter the sanctuary alone, slay every brother and sister in ascending order of seniority, and carve the sigil of the mother's coffin upon each throat. This measure seemed draconian but proved necessary, for greed and ego rose wherever coin and legend intermixed. Better an entire cell erased, the speakers argued, than the tenets diluted by self-styled warlords or petty thieves masquerading as assassins. Beyond organizational matters, the Brotherhood faced mounting opposition from secular powers. Emperor King Hestra's successors, seeking to bolster trade security, passed the edicts of safe conduit, documents promising protection to any merchant caravan that paid imperial tariff. When Brotherhood contracts began targeting caravan lords, the imperial battle mage Sindanmar raised an inquisition. Armed with divination crystals capable of detecting recent bloodshed upon weapons, his agents scoured crossroads inns across the Nibene Basin. More than a dozen innocents died under torture before a single Brotherhood operative was apprehended. A young Khajiit whose only identifying mark was a stylized paw inked across her throat, signifying allegiance to the Void. She revealed nothing, biting off her own tongue and choking on it rather than betray the mother's hush. The Inquisition fizzled soon after. Wealthy trade houses, fearing imperial overreach, lobbied for Sindanmar's dismissal and quietly subsidized Brotherhood fees as counterweight against rivals. As always, gold and fear outpaced law. Yet none of these external clashes rattled the Brotherhood so deeply as did internal philosophical rifts. While the purists revered the listener's every syllable, the opportunists gained foothold among younger blades who saw in Tamriel's turbulence a chance to amass unprecedented fortunes. They argued that Sithis cared only for entropy's harvest, not for channels through which that harvest cropped. If a village elder paid double coin to expedite a feud unsanctioned by the Black Hand, why refuse? Such reasoning threatened the fragile trust among sanctuaries. In Cheydinhall, the listener authorized a grim compromise. Speakers could, at their discretion, accept provisional contracts outside sacrament lineage, provided they delivered an appeasement sacrifice to the Night Mother in advance. This concession appeased dissenters while preserving semblance of doctrinal purity, but it planted seeds of future dispute that would, in centuries hence, bloom into lethal intrigue across the Empire's highest thrones. The theological dimension of Sithis and the Void deepened alongside more worldly concerns. Borrowing from Ayleid star cult archives discovered beneath Ondo, Brotherhood philosophers posited that the Void was not merely absence, but a perpendicular plane intersecting Mundus at infinite points. Every life represented a thread pinning, existence away from collapse. Each assassination cut a thread, loosening the tapestry so that it might someday dissolve. The Night Mother, they argued, served as both midwife and mortician of this dissolution. Her lullaby coaxed threads to slacken, her children's blades severed them. Such contemplations rarely reached wider Tamrielic discourse, but fragments leaked through clandestine dialogues with Sijic monks or necromantic scholars. Some of these allies served willingly, others coerced by fear of secret reprisal, but each interaction nudged the Brotherhood's metaphysics further from its Dunmeri parentage into a pan-cultural crucible of dark mysticism. Parallel to philosophical, evolution, practical craft advanced. Poison masters in Black Marsh refined a distillate from the gills of the Zethik eel, pronounced Zethik, creating a paralytic mist absorbed through skin. A single brush of the assassin's cloak might arrest breath, leaving a mark frozen in perfect terror before death. Meanwhile, high rock bladesmiths among the Brotherhood discovered a method to fold meteoric iron with powdered void salt, forging daggers that shimmered as though swallowing surrounding light. These hush steel weapons left wounds that bled internally yet showed scant evidence, allowing a victim to stagger several paces before collapsing, a delay often sufficient for the killer to vanish. Each innovation circulated through the sanctuaries by way of small, leather-bound manuals written in cipher so intricate that imperial librarians mistook them for herbals or weather logs. Across provinces, culture bent around the Brotherhood's silhouette. In Coral's marketplaces, townsfolk adopted the custom of painting doorframes with circles of crushed juniper on nights when moon and star aligned, believing the scent masked them from the Night Mother's notice. In Sentinel, ward priests of Tuwaka taught a funerary chant intended to persuade the void that a target was already dead, thus sparing the living from contract. These folk practices rarely impeded seasoned assassins, yet they revealed how deeply fear permeated daily life. The mere thought of an ashen handprint at dawn drove nobles to hire double retinues, merchants to shorten journeys, priests to multiply offertory bowls, and at every frightened whisper, the Brotherhood's name echoed louder, weaving itself into the folklore of bedtime stories and cautionary tavern songs. Still, the Order did not seek dominion. Power, as they conceived it, lay not in crowns, but in the hush that crowns dreaded. When King Logrolf, the Skald of Falkreath, hired Brotherhood blades to sever the ambitions of a neighbouring Jarl, he received no promise of allegiance. The assassins fulfilled the contract with chilling artistry, felling the rival beneath a midsummer aurora so that green-blue lights danced over red snow and then disappeared, leaving Logrolf as vulnerable as any other mark should coin and vengeance align. This cold neutrality became their defining trait, fostering an aura of inevitability that neither flattery nor threats could sway. To the Brotherhood, all mortals were equal in the Void's ledger. Only timing distinguished petitioner from prey. This fashion decades unfurled, each marked by quiet killings that skewed alliances and altered borders, yet left historians puzzled for lack of battlefield evidence. Then, during the reign of Cyrodiil's emperor Gorius, whose bright coin and heavy hand helped tame the Colovian estates, the Brotherhood confronted its first existential crisis, born not of external siege or doctrinal split, but of misinterpreted prophecy. An Argonian shadowscale named Seeks Beyond Reeds returned from a trance claiming the Night Mother had foretold a convergence, a moment when Void and Mundus would kiss, unmaking all illusion of separation. Seeks Beyond Reeds insisted that every assassin must deliver one final kill, themselves, offered voluntarily to speed the convergence and escort their own souls into the embrace of nothingness. Speakers recoiled. Suicide, they argued, cheated Sithis of entropy's cascade, truncating future deaths forfeited by blades, yet unsheathed. The listener spent 3 nights in communion before answering. Only the mother could sanction such an offering, and her whispers remained silent on the matter. Seeks Beyond Reeds would not be swayed. He led a splinter faction of 20 assassins into the marsh and performed mass self-immolation with swamp gas and black powder, singing hymns that gurgled as lungs charred. Their sacrifice birthed eerie phenomena. Spectral lights wandered fog, banks near Hellstrom for a generation, but the convergence failed to manifest. Still, the schism underscored a latent peril. Misheard whispers could spiral into cataclysm. To mitigate recurrence, the listener decreed auditory communions henceforth require at least 2 corroborating witnesses, typically a senior reader skilled in dream augury. Disciplinary structure tightened. Novices caught fabricating revelations, faced severing of their tongues, a literal enforcement of silence. Even as these internal guardrails hardened, the Brotherhood's spread continued. Sanctuaries sprouted like lunar-shaded mushrooms in damp sub-basements under abandoned forts, among root-thick caverns where bats hung as living drapes. Each new site was consecrated through an identical rite. The listener wrote a single line of the litany in blood upon raw stone and extinguished every torch at once, plunging the assembly into absolute darkness. In that darkness, recruits repeated the line until the final echo faded. Only when all stood attuned to that silence did torches rekindle, signifying the void's ascent. From these foundations sprang regional customs. In Valenwood, Bosmer brothers traded the dagger for bone-carved arrowheads fletched with moth wings, a gift from local greenspeakers who claimed the void resonated with Yffre's pre-dawn stillness. In the Alika Desert, Red Guard members perfected a sand-glass assassination. They buried themselves beneath dunes, emerging only when moonlight sketched target silhouettes upon shifting crests. Their kills, quick as mirages, contributed to legends of jinn curses among superstitious caravaneers. Within the steaming warrens of Gideon, Argonian practitioners cultivated marsh leeches that slid beneath a victim's skin to hollow organs imperceptibly, so murder appeared as natural wasting. Regardless of local flavor, the tenets remained inviolate. Cross-provincial councils convened every 20 years to reaffirm doctrine and exchange methodologies, ensuring coherence across diversity. Meanwhile, the Morag Tong regrouped after initial setbacks. Realizing outright annihilation of their wayward kin proved impractical beyond Morrowind's jurisdiction, they pursued sabotage through information leaks. Agents circulated forged Black Sacrament instructions, leading inexperienced petitioners to mutilate themselves without result, thus discrediting Brotherhood mystique. The Black Hand retaliated by sending a Dunmer Sharpmind known as Vale del Rene to infiltrate Telvanni Towers and expose Grandmaster corruption. Over a decade, Del Rene orchestrated discreet executions of minor house functionaries, each corpse left with a Morag Tong spider incised across the breastbone. Outrage among Telvanni elders compelled a purge of their own Grandmaster, briefly fracturing Tong unity and diverting their attention inward. Although the feud never ceased entirely, this strategic entanglement ensured the Brotherhood's relative freedom to pursue wider ambitions. Wider ambitions soon crystallized around a single audacious contract: the death of Queen Urchella of Shornhelm, commissioned by a coalition of rival Breton dukes fearful of her rapid militarization. The job required infiltration of Castle Thronewatch, a fortress reputed impregnable since Doreni Masons enchanted its walls with memory steel that self-mended, under moonlight. The assignment fell to Arquin Fel Sillen, a Cyrodiilic assassin whose voice was said to mimic any accent after hearing a single syllable. Over 7 months, she posed as almoner to the castle's apothecary, brewing tinctures for minor ailments. On Mid-Year's Eve, while minstrel troops drowned courtly halls in jubilant lyric, Arquin delivered a honey cordial laced with Zethic eel distillate to the Queen's personal goblet. Urchella's heart halted between breaths, leaving her slumped elegantly upon velvet cushions, appearing merely drowsy from revelry. No wound bled, no cry pierced music's swell. Her death destabilized alliances across High Rock for a generation, illustrating with terrible clarity how one silent act could reshape provincial fate. Though profitable, such high-profile kills intensified scrutiny. Nightly orders dedicated to Archay began patrolling crypts suspected of harboring Brotherhood relics. In Skingrad, a chapter of Vigilance of Stendar raided an herbalist's shop tied to speaker operations, seizing scrolls of Ravcon binding, spells used to mask life signatures. Under torture, the herbalist revealed little, save the phrase, "Mother moves in coffins, but coffins move as we breathe." This riddle confounded interrogators yet underscored a truth. The sarcophagus itself remained mobile, spirited from sanctum to sanctum like a queen on a perpetual tour, one step ahead of discovery. Records suggest that over the next century alone, the Night Mother's coffin traveled at least 6 times, reaching as far south as Lillandrul's pearl-gleaming docks and as far north as Dawnstar's ice-choked quays. Each relocation required orchestration across provinces, bribing stevedores, falsifying customs crates, employing illusionists to cast glamours of mundane cargo. The logistical complexity forged unprecedented cooperation among sanctuaries, further knitting them into seamless web. Within this web, the opportunist creed gained new adherents, success breeding boldness. Some speakers engineered contracts for political outcomes of their devising. Topple a tyrant to create power vacuum others would pay to fill, thereby multiplying revenue. Purists decried such manipulation as vanity. The listener, whose health had begun to wane, breath rattling from too many incense fumes inhaled over decades, sought guidance in the coffin's silent plain. He emerged from trance, declaring that a time of testing loomed. Those who placed coin above void would face reaping. Skeptics murmured that prophecy served conveniently to suppress economic initiative, yet none dared defy him outright. Instead, they waited, like wolves ringed around a fading matriarch, for weakness to afford opportunity. Weakness arrived in the form of plague. Originating in the harbours of Sensual, the shudderpox leapt by trade vessel up the Topal Sea, blackening limbs and scarring lungs with pustules that burst at final breath. Brotherhood messengers succumbed alongside merchant sailors, breaking lines between sanctuaries. Contracts stalled, payments missed, rumours of betrayal multiplied. In the chaos, a speaker named Gaius Pravan, formerly the itinerant finger of the Black Hand, declared the listener incapacitated and claimed sole communion rights. He produced new dictates, authorizing unrestricted contract acceptance to finance sanctuary relief. 3 provinces away, the aging listener countered, with edicts forbidding any kill not channeled through verified sacrament. Communication by courier proved too slow. Misinformation spread faster than clarity. Inevitably, blades turned inward. Praven dispatched 2 silencers to Cheydinhall, expecting to find the listener frail and unguarded, yet even as consumption racked his lungs, the listener's paranoia had birthed defenses. He flooded vault passages with crimson nirnroot vapor, a toxin harmless to those prepared with antidote, but fatal to intruders. The silencers died, coughing, foam, staining their silvered masks with magenta froth. Their corpses were hung upside down at the sanctuary threshold, throats carved with a glyph meaning folly. When news reached Pravan, he feigned innocence, but the other speakers smelt ambition on him like rot. They convened at a ruined villa near Braville, neutral ground, and demanded he recite the tenets aloud. Upon faltering at tenet 3, he was cut by 20 blades in concert, each stroke superficial, each calculated to prolong agony while draining blood into a silver basin. His death served as both punishment and renewal. The blood was mixed with oil and painted upon the villa's broken columns, anointing the structure as momentary altar of the sundering oath reaffirmed. In the purge's wake, the plague waned, trade resumed, and the listener's health stabilized, his withered lungs sustained by poultices derived from hissed sap smuggled through Anvil's sewers. He lived another decade, long enough to witness Emperor Gorios's final campaign along the Iliac Bay. Historians note curious coincidences during those years. Siege plans inexplicably leaked to enemy hands, supply caravans vanished en route to front lines, and at the campaign's conclusion, Gorios was found dead within his private carriage, eyes open as if greeting an unseen companion. Official chronicles attribute the demise to apoplexy, yet among Cheydinhall's dim corridors, brothers whispered that the mother had claimed a debt for the emperor's earlier edicts against them. The listener died soon after, body interred in the same coffin that had borne the mother's remains for centuries. His embalmed form was folded like a penitent, placed at her desiccated feet, and sealed behind the brass-bound lid. Assistants claimed to hear a sigh ripple through the chamber when the latch clicked, as though the coffin itself expressed gratitude. From then onward, it was decreed that the mortal husk of every listener should rest within the sarcophagus until space no longer allowed, an honorific yet practical measure, ensuring a lineage of guardians literally encircled the mother's form. Leadership passed to a Bosma woman called Ethruin Gloam Tongue, whose communion manifested less through sound and more through scent. She described sensing bloomed nightshade whenever the mother willed her presence. Under Ethruin, the Brotherhood's operations became subtler still. Rather than dramatic highborn kills, they favored systemic erosion, poisoning seed stocks before harvests, igniting rumors that drove chieftains to murder each other out of suspicion, forging decrees that sparked succession crises. Entropy, by 1,000 cuts, proved as nourishing to the void as any single spectacular execution and incurred less immediate retribution. Even their enemies begrudgingly adapted. The Fighters Guild revised contracts to include a clause refusing protection against unknowable threats, a tacit acknowledgement that shielding clients from the Brotherhood remained beyond mortal assurance. Mage colleges studied wards of silence, magicka webs meant to break soundless footfalls, yet found them costly and unreliable. The Morag Tong, bloodied though unbroken, shifted strategy. Rather than hunt the Brotherhood directly, they petitioned houses to restrict cross-border contracts, hoping to starve their rivals of gold. But greed and grief proved inexhaustible commodities. For each noble barred from hiring beyond Morrowind, 10 commoners elsewhere lit candles over effigies, chanting the sacrament in quavering voices. Through it all, the sundering oath endured, binding the Brotherhood's heart to an isolation more spiritual than geographic. They no longer measured themselves against the spider cult. The Morag Tong had become echo, distant and irrelevant to a creed now rooted across every province. Their true adversary was dilution of purpose, of silence, of the razor-thin balance between devotion and ambition. So Ethruin commissioned a library carved into the tunnels beneath Cheydinhall, housing every treatise, confession, and post-mortem tale culled from centuries. She instructed scribes to weave each scroll into a tapestry of origin, so acolytes might trace the straight black thread from Mephalah's first whisper to the coffin's present hush. Knowledge, she believed, insulated faith from corruption by reminding each initiate of the cost paid in exile, blood, and oath. By the dawn of the Second Era, the Brotherhood stood paradoxically fragile and formidable. Sanctuaries populated but dispersed, coffers full yet forever funneled into concealment, doctrine elaborate yet contingent upon whispers from a corpse whose origins scholars still debated. None within the Order could predict the storms that would one day convulse the Empire. Dragonfires dimming, alliances fracturing, thrones toppling like rotted timber. They knew only that where death walked in secrecy, they would follow, blades, sheathed in silk, until the moment came to unveil the void. Thus Chapter 2 closes with the Brotherhood's web stretched taut across Tamriel, vibrant strands humming with the tension of unseen forces, each vibration heralding a future kill, each knot an oath to the coffin bride who listens eternally in darkness. Beneath the hush of a world newly entered into the swirl of the Second Era, Tamriel's evenings settled into rhythms marked by the distant toll of chapel bells, the clatter of caravans, and, in places unseen, the almost inaudible scrape of chalk upon stone. Those chalk lines, set by hands robed in black, were waymarks, the faint lattice of a web widening across every province. With each line, the Dark Brotherhood tested walls, listened to echoes, learned which corridors of power might bear the strain of silence without shattering. They advanced quietly, much as ivy creeps along a keep's foundation, slow, persistent, inevitable. And in that advance the Order matured, shedding what remained of its flight-born improvisation for an architecture of secrecy so refined that, later, historians struggled even to sense its outline in the record of centuries. The listener, Ethruin Gloamtongue, began the process, but it was her successor, the Colovian-born Seraphael of Gideon's Shades, who forged the Brotherhood's expansion into a doctrine of geometry. He believed every sanctuary should mirror a constellation, binding the mortal world to the void through patterns of star-wrought symmetry. Where the mother's coffin paused, he mapped lines to distant, hidden echo cells, small chambers no larger than a dovecote hollow, stocked with supplies and sealed by rune so only a blade tip, pressed to the proper groove, could open them. Couriers drifted along those lines like pollinating insects, carrying thin bundles of rice paper inked with 1 or 2 names, never more. If waylaid by Legion patrols or Tong hunters, the couriers could swallow the paper and vanish beneath anonymity, as traders, monks, or root picker women. Mouths washed by tannin blackened, leaving nothing readable even at the brink of death. From Cyrodiil's oak-thick heartland, the web stretched first into High Rock, following embattled roadways where Breton city-states waged perpetual border feuds. The port town of Wayrest, flush with coin from Iliac Bay shipping lanes, presented both opportunity and risk. Seraphael sent a speaker known to local ledgers only as the Jasper Quill. Under cover of a merchant house that imported cinnabar from Yokuda's scarred islands, the Quill purchased a forgotten salt cellar of the old Dureni basements. Over 9 months, masons wearing illusions of blindness and deafness reshaped those damp halls, chiseling channels to redirect sea fog so it condensed and dripped continuously across polished basalt floors, a sound chosen for its capacity to mask hushed footfalls. When the salt scent grew strong enough to sting nostrils, new initiates were introduced. 6 refugees from Evermore's famine, each starved until their heartbeats slowed to a pace conducive to assassin's stealth. They learned to breathe, through moist cloth, to step where the drip landed loudest, to kill with maritime knots that left as little blood as a mermaid's tear. In time, the Wayrest cell became the model for coastal sanctuaries, unassuming, economically tethered to legitimate trade, soaking in the transitory air of docks where identities shift with each tide. Eastward, the web anchored at Braville, deep, in reed-haunted Nibonay. There, waterlogged tunnels discarded by Aliad canal builders formed an underground warren, in which sound carried unpredictably, amplifying whispers into ripples that lingered like dream static. The builders of the Braville sanctuary embraced this property rather than dread it. They placed chimes of hollow bone at every junction. The resonance of each chime grew so familiar to local brothers that they navigated by pitch alone, blindfolded, learning to read the music of corridor and chamber. Visitors hearing a wrong note would quickly find a blade at throat, the warning issued in a voice calm enough to pass for prayer. Within these damp halls, the Brotherhood codified a new schooling of assassination, auditory warfare. They studied how frequencies distracted, how footsteps on certain planks could disguise the click of opening doors, how a sudden hush could startle prey into fatal misstep more surely than a shouted threat. Braville's arts later travelled to Somerset, where Altmer guilds of song welcomed the challenge of melodic murder, weaving harp flourishes so subtly that a single plucked string might signal a court musician to release hemlock into the emperor's wine. While sanctuaries multiplied, bureaucratic sinew thickened. The Black Hand, once an austere council of 5, instituted a second tier, the Fingers of Trust. 10 in number, these envoys roamed Tampilla highways, verifying each speaker's ledgers against physical evidence. They bore lacquered cylinders, sealed by a glyph of negative space, an outline that seemed to swallow torchlight when turned just so. Inside each cylinder lay an iron stylus and a roll of vellum stained to match dried blood. They recorded nothing in ink. Instead, after inspection, they pressed the stylus point to vellum and let minute droplets of their own blood mark tallies. Those marks congealed into numbers legible only through a distillation of void salt fumes. Thus, a ledger seized by enemy forces revealed nothing but faint brown imperfections, an apparent parchment gone stale with age. The fingers' itineraries followed a rhythm. No sanctuary visited twice in a single season. No finger allowed to remain in one province more than a moon cycle. Constant motion kept them beyond triangulation. Legend claims a 7th Legion intelligence chief, frustrated by the finger's elusiveness, offered a baron's ransom for a single envoy's capture. In response, the Brotherhood delivered the chief's corpse to the Legion's breakfast hall with a note: "We are nearer to your throat than the price of your next breath." The gold remained unclaimed, the bounty board quietly removed. Concurrent with bureaucratic refinement came re-examination of the tenets. For a generation, the rules had stood firm, but as sanctuaries burgeoned, some clauses demanded clarification. What precisely constituted betrayal? Was it revelation under torture, under magical compulsion, or by accident of overheard speech? What if a novice's slip endangered the hand's secrecy, but offered strategic advantage in sowing false rumor? A convocation gathered in a petrified grotto beneath Vardenfell's western coast, neutral ground where both Morag Tong emissaries and Brotherhood delegates could observe without immediate bloodshed. Discussion endured 9 nights, each marked by measured ingestion of dream sedge to induce states of hyperlucidity. Ultimately, the tenets remained unchanged. However, an oral codicil known as the Veiled Commentary enumerated 99 scenarios of potential ambiguity, prescribing consequences scaled from penance service to immediate purification. The codicil's existence was, and remains, oral only, committed to memory by every speaker in a chant-like litany of paired couplets whose meter prevented misquotation. In the rare instance that an outside scholar recorded fragments, they found only nonsense verse such as, "When shadow feeds on shadow's bone, the hush must reap its hush alone." To initiate this couplet signified that a warranted kill turned accidental upon a fellow brother demanded self-sacrifice at dawn before the mother. To outsiders it read as portentous fluff, inscrutable as a child's riddle. While the tenets solidified, the art of killing advanced by way of cross-disciplinary scholarship. Alchemy, ever the silent partner of the blade, enjoyed a renaissance. When Skingrad's vintners discovered that certain molds growing upon Grand Cru casks produced spores able to blind within heartbeats, harvested by master apprentices, distilled with burnt cochineal for stability, the spores became the basis of Owl's Eclipse, dust fine enough to blow from a ring cavity, and potent enough that a mere whisper through afflicted eyes led to aneurysm. Meanwhile, Dwemer curiosities retrieved from Markarth's abandoned reaches yielded retractable needles capable of delivering poisons without perceptible puncture. Nord scholars hammered these into wrist-mounted arrays disguised as runic cuffs. The first recorded use occurred at Dawnstar's Yarmout. Witness accounts described a steward coughing once, eyes glassing over, then falling dead, while the assassin, disguised as a bard, never halted his mournful recitation of the Lay of Tusk and Thorn. Through such tools, the Brotherhood shaped politics, like a potter thumbing clay. Yet their influence rarely took creditable form. Kings died, judges vanished, but scribes found no parchment linking deaths to a single organization. Instead, there spread the superstition of debt paid in blood, rumor that anyone, anywhere, could call upon a hidden pantheon of knives if desperation outweighed fear. This democratization of dread changed Tamriel more profoundly than any one regicide. Feuding farmers in the Alaka desert whispered sacrament verses over sand-drawn dolls, begging deliverance from bandit warlords. Apprentice mages at the Arcane University repeated the rhyme half in jest, until one prankster found his arrogance rewarded by a crossbow bolt through the library's stained glass dome and straight into his spine. Whether each death truly traced to Brotherhood hands mattered less than public perception. Uncertainty itself became the Order's strongest shroud. Still, contracts of grand consequence continued, tethering the Brotherhood's myth to pivotal history. Among the most clandestine was the assassination of Caliban's Septim, an obscure cousin to Cyrodiil's ruling line, whose claim threatened to fracture imperial succession. Empress Hestra II, herself newly crowned and insecure, could not openly sanction court murder. Through a chain of proxies, each believing the next sought personal revenge, she funneled coin to a speaker, who in turn entrusted the task to a pair of shadow scales from Black Marsh. These Argonian twins, called half-drowned eels for the burn, scars upon their throats, infiltrated Caliban's retinue as silent foot servants, feigning a vow of penitent muteness. Over 2 months they studied his nightly routine, learning that he prayed alone at a private shrine to Shezar each sundown. On the final evening, they dosed the shrine's oil lamp with fumeless swamp resin that rendered unconscious any who inhaled its vapor. While Caliban knelt in haze-draped supplication, they bound him with silk cords, positioned him upright upon the shrine, and opened his veins in the pattern of the 5-pointed hand. By morning, palace guards believed a ritual suicide had occurred, the prince overcome by guilt at challenging his cousin's rightful claim. Hestra's rule stabilized, and in gratitude she quietly abolished certain precursor tariffs that had hampered Argonian spice trade, unintended boon for Black Marsh's economy. But the twins' ledger of void was satisfied. Beyond such singular events, the Brotherhood's slower manipulations evolved into a tradition known as tilling the field. Speakers identified regions whose social unrest might yield future contracts, then seeded that unrest just enough to push grievances toward vendetta. This practice required delicate calibration. Too much chaos attracted legion intervention. Too little produced no profitable bitterness. In Sentinel, for instance, the Brotherhood financed clandestine gambling dens where Redguard honor duels escalated into blood feuds, each culminating in paid requests for honorable respite. In the end, the Brotherhood earned coin and prestige, yet left minimal trace as provocateur. Critics within the Order warned that deliberate cultivation of misery risked eroding moral detachment, should assassins become farmers of sorrow, feeding on crops they themselves poisoned. But the opportunists argued that entropy was not passive, it demanded shepherds. The debate simmered, unresolved, absorbed into the codicil as Couplet 77. When soil is thirsting for crimson rain, the fee reaper may whisper to quicken the grain. Even as internal tensions flickered, external threats redoubled. The Imperial College of Whispers, newly formed to curb Telvanni spy magic, developed scrying bowls capable of tracing residual soul echoes from crime scenes. If a murder scene retained a psychic imprint of the killer's emotions, the bowl could reveal approximate race, height, and emotional state. The Brotherhood answered with the rite of the hollow veil. An assassin must meditate beforehand until personal identity fluttered like a leaf caught between breezes. Entering the kill half void of self, they left imprints so diffuse that scrying bowls showed only a silhouette akin to static. No features, no race, only a cold absence, as though the void itself wielded the blade. When Whisper's agents presented these findings to the Elder Council, one elderly councillor reputedly fainted, convinced they had glimpsed Sithis' shadow. Perhaps the Order's most ambitious foray into metaphysics came with the creation of the 10-score coffers, 100 jeweled reliquaries forged from meteoric glass, harvested at Vivek's command during a rare astral fall. Each coffer was attuned to a specific phrase of the Litany of Blood. When a speaker placed contract payment within a matched coffer and spoke the phrase, the reliquary sealed itself with no visible seam. Only the assassin assigned that phrase could open it, for the Night Mother's whisper keyed the mechanism through an oral pattern, inaudible to uninitiated ears. Inevitably, treasure hunters coveted the coffers. Rumors of their indestructibility spread, culminating in a daring raid by the Thieves' Guild in Balmora. The burglars snatched 3 coffers, only to discover them inert, unyielding lumps useless, as currency. Days later, their hideout erupted in flame. Witnesses told of a woman clad in mourning silk who strolled from the blaze unhurried, coffers cradled against her breast. No further guild raids followed. As decades drifted into centuries, the Night Mother's sarcophagus threaded its pilgrimage through sanctuaries. Each relocation seeded whispers of omen. Should the coffin rest upon a province's soil, some believed, that land would soon host a death-shaping destiny. Consider the case of Riften. When the coffin arrived by secret barge along Lake Honrish, Jarl succession teetered between pacifist heir Lear Ghoul Stormhand and bellicose cousin Valda. Within a month, Valda lay murdered in a mead cellar, throat etched with the coffin glyph. Riften thereafter pursued trade and relative peace for 30 years, altering Eastmarch's power calculus and forestalling a possible border war with Morrowind. To Brotherhood archivists, the result illustrated how Void served not simply as destroyer but as subtle architect. By removing one spur of violence, they sometimes curbed greater slaughter. Yet members seeking philosophical solace seldom spoke such nuance aloud. The Order flourished best when known only by dread, not by accidental mercy. During this long maturation, the Morag Tong itself endured internal ructions. The dissolution of House Indoril, the Red Year's early omens, but remained more localized. Tong grandmasters had come to regard the Brotherhood as distant kin occupied by alien gods, yet bound by a shared ancestor. Periodic ceasefire pacts allowed information exchange where mutual benefit glimmered. For instance, during the Pale Lily scandal, when both organizations discovered they had accepted contracts on the same emperor's mistress. A diplomatic envoy convened inside a derelict Khajiiti moon sugar kiln. After tense negotiation, they agreed to a symbolic joint kill, two blades striking the heart simultaneously to honor both pacts. Each side recorded the deed differently. Tong legends emphasize Mephala approval. Brotherhood scrolls attribute the act to Void concurrence. But the cooperation hinted that rivalry need not always translate to open war. Outside clandestine circles, the shape of Tamrielic faith shifted. Arche priests began advocating void fasts, periods of speechless reflection intended to inoculate the soul against the mother's call. Dibellan courtiers crafted lullabies praising starlight as an antidote to coffin whisper sleep. Even, the mainstream chantry of Julianos issued tractates on entropy cults, warning of philosophical traps wherein death masquerades as freedom. The Brotherhood rarely counteracted such rhetoric directly. To do so would risk revealing presence. Instead, they wove tiny gestures into their work, leaving victims posed as if mid-prayer to whichever deity had failed them. A reminder that no, ward sufficed where coin and desperation met. At times, deities themselves were drawn into paradox. One peculiar episode involved the Meridia-chosen Dawnstar cleric Valerius Halcyon. He spread sermons proclaiming that the Dawn Goddess's light shone so fiercely it could not be dimmed by Sithis' ink. Several nobles, inspired, ceased payments for Brotherhood protection. Within a season they were slain. Halcyon raged from the pulpit, demanding divine retribution. On the winter solstice he disappeared. When dawn broke, his congregation found the chapel doorway marked by a shimmering handprint of pure prismatic glass. Neither ash nor paint, but something fused through unknown sorcery. Scholars argued the Brotherhood could not harness Meridia's spectra. Perhaps Daedric warring overlapped. Whatever the truth, the fearsome vision restored old caution. Nobles resumed payments, whispering that even light could cast fatal shadow. Behind these public ripples, the Brotherhood's quietest revolution unfolded in its training halls. Ethruin's library project, now several generations old, evolved into the Noctograph, a memory palace spanning province-specific annexes where assassins could drill histories through guided dreamwalk. Pupils drank diluted terror sap, lay upon basalt slabs carved with constellations, and allowed monks of the hollow veil to shepherd them into lucid visions of notable kills past. By reliving mastery, novices absorbed technique without breaking the tenet against revealing fellow assassins' identities. Faces in dream remained blurred, voices muffled, deeds experienced only as sensation and sequence. This pedagogy refined skill faster than traditional mentorship, spawning a cadre of killers who wielded centuries of composite wisdom before their 20th year. One such prodigy was Adelaine Scribe of Knots, an Altmer orphan raised within Shimmering Grove Sanctuary, where tree canopies weaved so densely above that sunshafts reached floor like spears of luminance. Adelaine mastered silent aerial descent using spider silk harnesses anchored to upper boughs. At 19, tasked with eliminating a reclusive Psijic who threatened to expose Brotherhood patterns through chronomantic research, she infiltrated Artaeum itself, a feat thought impossible since the island's phase shift illusions repelled all uninvited. She synchronized her approach to the moment the island blinked into Mundus for convocation. Gliding on membranes of netchhide dyed the same hue as early twilight. Witnesses among the Psijics claimed merely that Master Othrelus seemed to dissolve. Mid-sentence, his robe sagging inward as if the body beneath erupted into intangible dust. Adelaine's blade, tipped with powdered meteoric glass, left wounds smaller than quill piercings. No blood marked marble floors. She returned with a single strand of the target's silver beard as proof, which the speaker set within a reliquary, now displayed only during black moon vigils as caution against hubris. The Psijics responded in subtler ways. Temporal wards around sensitive tomes, a soft embargo on certain star charts. Yet even they acknowledged, through grudging private correspondence, with the Elder Council, that any attempt to eradicate the Brotherhood would be analogous to stamping out shadow by waving flame. The stronger the light, the darker and sharper the outline becomes. Around this era, the opportunist faction reached peak influence. Speakers orchestrated long-range schemes intertwining commerce routes, border skirmishes, and even guild charters, shaping conditions conducive to profitable deaths. Some, like the wily Cosimo of Leowin, ventured dangerously close to overt sabotage, burning harvest stores to guarantee famine, then accepting contracts from starving barons seeking to reduce rival claimants. The listener of the time, a Dunmer, matron named Sevrosa the Bentwing, tolerated such brazenness until Cosimo's manipulations caused an outbreak of plague that indiscriminately slew peasants and nobility alike, reducing potential contract flow for years. Viewing this as counter-entropy, the Void prefers selective, meaningful nullity, not randomized oblivion. Sevrosa ordered purification. A silencer rode north on a horse whose hooves were wrapped in felt. Each night he recited the litany backwards, a method believed to erase fate lines guiding diviners. In the pale dawn outside Anvil's city gate, Cosimo's entire cell was found kneeling in a circle, their hearts pierced by their own quills, parchment clutched in stiff fingers spelling a single word, atoned. That blood lesson cooled opportunist excess for a generation, yet did not extinguish ambition. Instead, it redirected cunning toward less devastating avenues, such as quiet usurpations, replacing bureaucrats with Brotherhood doubles, trained to mimic gait and signature until structural changes positioned corridors of power for later harvest. Double agents rarely lived long. Their missions culminated in self-sacrifice, timed with a strategic revelation of betrayal, ensuring no leaf of suspicious parity remained to trace the Brotherhood. Sacrifice was woven into the Ot Hakir vow, recited by every double upon accepting the role. May my face be mask, my soul be cask, that mother may drink of me when the hush calls task. In this intertwining of self-obliteration and greater orchestration, the cult's theology deepened anew. Scholars within the order posited that each losing of self, whether momentary for hollow veil rites or permanent through double duty, mirrored the primeval severance by which Sithis split possibility from void. Reenacting that first cut, they argued sustained cosmic rhythm. Thus martyrdom for an assassin was not absence of reward, but attainment of purest resonance with the dread Father. Such doctrine comforted novices trembling at threshold of their first kill, reinforcing calm, so, paramount to Brotherhood style. The victim should glimpse serenity in the eyes of approaching death, a final mercy before dissolution. Soon after, an epical wave of maritime exploration reached Tamriel's shores, with Colovian shipwrights fitting keels able to brave the far Eltharic Sea. New continents hinted, new markets promised, and the Brotherhood followed where profit and rivalry emerged. Speakers invested quietly in shipping consortiums, embedding assassins as navigators or quartermasters. These seaborne cells of the foam knife carried portable coffins, small ebony boxes lined with lead inlay bearing miniature glyphs of the Mother. When a contract required enactment aboard storm-tossed decks, they performed a condensed sacrament, using tar-soaked rope, barnacle shards, and a thrice-knotted scarf steeped in sea salt. Targets were slipped overboard mid-night, throats scored, so blood mingled instantly with foam, and weights lashed to ankles in the shape of the Black Hand. Sailors spoke thereafter of ghostly palms rising on crests before vanishing, as though the waves themselves applauded the kill. With roots established, exotic poisons entered the Brotherhood's arsenal. Lattice coral toxins that hardened veins into brittle filigree, ebony scale dust from sea serpents that devoured nerve endings, fungus spores that induced euphoric compliance before heart stoppage. Such substances proved difficult to farm outside foreign reefs, reinforcing the foam knife's logistical value and granting speakers fresh leverage when bartering within mainland sanctuaries. But far travel also incubated heresy. A small cadre, stationed on the distant isle of Esroniet, encountered cults worshipping Padome, Sithis' conceptual cousin, in forms divergent enough to spark theological debate. These assassins returned espousing views that the Night Mother was but one bride among many, and proposed founding a northern sisterhood. The Black Hand deliberated, then dispatched an emissary offering integration under codified oversight. Negotiations soured, daggers spoke, survivors, few, abandoned the faith, fled into obscurity. The sundering reaffirmed central doctrine: multiplicity invites fracture. Unity within the void requires single maternal axis. Back on the mainland, the creak of imperial ambitions grew louder. Emergent warlords dreamt of dragon banners, and the Dragon Guard, predecessors to the Blades, patrolled road and rookery for subversive cells. Some Dragon Guard captains cultivated grudging respect for Brotherhood efficiency. Fewer riotous battles meant fewer villages burned, yet official edict remained hostile. A clandestine partnership formed whereby certain captains exchanged smuggled Akaviri steel for assurance that no contracts would target their patrols. Historians call these pacts the Jade Appraisals, after the dragon green pommel stones marking compliant blades. The fragile truce persisted until one captain, corrupted by skooma, ordered a massacre of roadside refugees. Outraged petitioners turned to the Brotherhood. The captain's jade longsword arrived the next morning on the doorstep of Cloud Ruler Temple, its blade fused into slag, hilt clasped by a severed left hand. Truce dissolved, jade appraisals ceased, and the Dragon Guard resumed full-throated pursuit, though with little effect. It would be during this uneasy dance of hidden knives and public crowns that the Brotherhood completed its maturation from clandestine guild to cultural constant. Evidence lies less in annals than in absence. Across parchment stacks chronicling border treaties, one finds clauses assuming assassinations as foreseeable costs, much like famine or flood. Insurance syndicates in Alinor included void event, riders to reimburse heirs should contract take a merchant unexpectedly. Universities lectured on forensic countermeasures, and still lecturers concluded with admission. Success rate remains uncertain, invisible yet ubiquitous. The Brotherhood had become a law of nature, impossible to annul, merely navigated. And at the center of this vast humming web, the Night Mother's coffin continued its slow pilgrimage, bearing within its brittle chambers the husks of bygone listeners, and the scent of quiet so profound it tasted of vanished dawns. Where she paused, walls took on deeper shadow. Where she lingered, hearts beat a touch slower, as though reminded that each motion echoes toward still termination. For assassins kneeling in her presence, the hush sharpened into guiding lullaby. For the world beyond sanctuary thresholds, the hush remained unheard, yet felt in every hesitation of a monarch signing decrees, in every merchant's glance toward an unmarked doorframe, in every child's ear pressed a pillow against imagined footsteps. Thus, the Second Era advanced, its histories etched by quills, its destinies pruned by knives, each unseen stroke tethered to that traveling coffin and the bride who listened inside. The Brotherhood's geometry of silence now spanned meridian lines and mountain chains, an empire of nothingness parallel to every empire of stone. And though no preacher could scour its presence with prayer, no battle mage seal it with ward, the order itself still trembled beneath questions of vanity, restraint, and the unending hunger of Sithis. Those tremors, faint but inexorable, would one day convulse into purges vast enough to stain even their own memory houses. But for now, the web held, the candles burned low, and Tamriel drifted onward, blissfully unaware of how much of its fate depended upon the measured rhythm of breath in crypts far below. Winter crept across the summits of the Reach like white ink spilled over a dark engraving, muting the restless clamour of goat bells and forcing High Rock's mule trains onto the more sheltered Breton inland roads. In such pause between harvest fatigue and spring campaigns, rulers traditionally reckoned their accounts, counted coin, squared grievances, weighed the price of peace against pride. It was in the hush of one such winter that the Night Mother's coffin, borne on a wagon disguised as an itinerant reliquary of Stendar, crossed the frozen bridges of the Buellsay and slipped into the candle-lit vaults beneath Daggerfall. With her arrival, the Dark Brotherhood entered a new phase, pivoting from patient expansion to a season of strokes so surgically placed that Tamriel's very cartography bent. The first of these strokes unfolded not in Daggerfall itself, but 200 leagues southeast in the Colovian city of Kvatch, where the comital throne had passed, through a convoluted tangle of marriages, into the hands of Dame Gallienne Ilundi. Gallienne, a woman of iron composure, championed a confederation of Colovian counties intended to curb the Nibonese merchants' monopoly on topal trade. Her plan threatened vested interests from Leowyn to Skingrad, and in every wine hall whisperers speculated on the price of her downfall. It came sooner and cheaper than most advisors dared fear. A steward named Tegaldus filed a quiet petition, a black sacrament performed on a winter midnight, employing a gilded figurine carved in the dame's image from the tallow of her personal chapel candles. The Night Mother, cradled beneath Daggerfall's sandstone crypt, listened. Speaker Adrian Corval, the hushed falcon of Coral Sanctuary, assigned the contract to a pair of apprentices scarcely blooded by lesser kills, Lysandra of the Six, Shards and Velus Duskcoil, each raised on stories of Kvatch's heroic bulwarks, each bent on proving equal to legend. They travelled as siblings in mourning black, claiming to escort the ashes of a fictional aunt to the city's cathedral choir vaults. Kvatch, perched upon its sheer-walled bluff, greeted them with frozen torch fire and suspicion. For Dame Gallienne's vigilance never waned. But suspicion alone cannot shield every corridor. The apprentices studied palace routine, noting a narrow gallery where heated flues kept frost from settling. They discovered that when the hearth bell of the second watch tolled, Galien walked that gallery alone, reading dispatches so as not to disturb her chamber. 3 nights of reconnaissance taught them the cadence of her steps, the moment she paused to consider each letter. And down in the kitchens, they learned that steam rising from treacle pudding vats condensed on the gallery arches, dripping at intervals precise enough to mask the sound of breaking chalk beneath a boot. On the appointed evening, they prepared a draught brewed from frostbite venom diluted with honeyed wine, non-lethal, but potent enough to slow a body's reflex by half. A heartbeat, Velus, disguised as a scullion, dripped a finger's worth into the dame's cup before the courtiers sat for dinner. At second watch, she strode her gallery as predicted. Lysandra shadowed above, lashed by a harness to the rafter beam, blade kissed with hush steel. She timed her descent to the rhythm of falling condensation. The kill was seamless. A hand clamped over Galien's mouth, a dagger slipped between vertebrae, and the corpse lowered, almost reverently, so blood pooled in silence upon the marble tiles. Velus, waiting below in the servants' stairwell, donned the dame's ermine-lined cloak and, hood drawn low, strode past sentries skeined by sleep-meal malaise. By dawn, Kvatch awoke motherless to its Confederation dreams. Political momentum fractured, rival counts delayed ratifying Galien's treaties, and Nibonese merchant houses celebrated the spring with tariffs intact. What made this contract notable was not the deftness of its execution, though minstrels would later sing the tale as if Lysandra were a spirit folded into shadow, but its calculated ripples. Coral's speaker had chosen novices on purpose. He wished to demonstrate that even the least among the mother's children could unseat a countess. That lesson reached every provincial seat within weeks. Dismissive snorts about honorless murderers faded into quieter resolves to keep accounts paid in full. More importantly, Kvatch's upheaval persuaded a generation of Colovian barons that subtlety did what whole columns of legionnaires could not. The next decade saw a marked decline in open siege warfare and a corresponding rise in flurries of private contracts, small, precise, freezing the map in place while lords sharpened their ambitions like quarrymen whetting chisels against marble. Coin poured into the sanctuaries, but wealth alone never satisfied the void. The listener, Sevrosa the bent wing, listened nightly to the coffin's muffled lullaby. She began speaking of threads, of how each slaying tugged skeins of fate toward an intricate pattern only Sithis could fathom. Her cryptic ruminations alarmed opportunist and purist alike, for both factions sensed unspoken intent. She meant to orchestrate kills that did more than serve clients. They would prune branches of dynastic trees so that the harvest of silence came evenly across provinces, neither too riotous nor too barren. Thus commenced what internal chronicles later named the Great Balancing. It began with a contract that never existed on parchment. Emperor Brazolus Dor, aging yet resolute, had survived uprisings and 2 poisoning attempts. His heir, Prince Jovinius, cultivated artists and charities, and in doing so earned the hidden envy of generals whose salaries he trimmed to fund marble colonnades. The generals whispered treason. Petitions circulated, but none dared risk the Brotherhood's price or wrath. Sevrosa intervened without an external client. Legend holds she knelt before the coffin and heard a lullaby that ended on a single name spoken thrice. Jovinius, Jovinius, Jovinius. If true, it was the first assassination undertaken solely at the Night Mother's direct whim, unmediated by petition. Sevrosa dispatched Adelaine Scribe of Knots, whose marksmanship now bordered mythic. On a cloudless sun's dawn morning, as emperor and heir paraded along the green road south of the imperial city, a single arrow lanced from the forest. To watchers, it seemed to materialize from thin air, passing through an aperture no wider than a sparrow's wing, skewering the prince's larynx without so much as ruffling the emperor's silk sleeve. Panic reigned. Brazolas's guards scoured the woods but found no trace save a knot of silken thread tied around the arrow's fletching. Adelaine's signature. The emperor, grief-stricken, recalled the generals to court, lavished them with renewed stipends, and cancelled further arts patronage. Tamriel's central legions thus remained loyal through the simmering conflicts of the following generation, staving off fracturing that might have fractured empire into early dissolution. What looked like murder, most cruel perhaps, preserved greater stability, if stability can be measured in years of postponed bloodshed. Not all listeners within the Black Hand agreed with such unsolicited service. Speaker Malvasa Crowwing argued at the next convocation that assassinations lacking client payment eroded their commercial veil. Yet the tenets spoke nothing against obeying the mother's murmur, and Sevrosa's command remained undisputed. Crowwing bowed, but his disquiet sowed future tensions. In quiet corners, he cautioned ambitious blades that uncommissioned kills risked aligning the Brotherhood too closely with imperial fortunes, an irony not lost on those remembering Mephalah's ancient disdain for worldly puppet strings. While governance wavered under unseen pruning, the Brotherhood turned eyes seaward. Dominion scouts reported Aldmeri maritime builds capable of crossing Abexian gales faster than any Colovian keel. Should Somerset's princes coordinate fleets, they might strangle Skyrim's spice imports, forcing Nords to raid south. Sevrosa authorized intervention, yet she forbade direct slaughter of admirals. Too obvious, certain to ignite vengeance. Instead, she targeted the Sylvan mathematician Iralian of Vulcal Guard, whose astral calculations guided the shipyard angles. The sacrament came from no mortal lips. Once again, the coffin whispered. The speaker in Shimmering Grove nominated a trio of Bosma climbers, experts at from-above descent. They infiltrated Iralian's observatory during a lunar eclipse, stringing nets woven of darkleaf to catch falling roof tiles. As the mathematician peered through his star glass, recalculating keel curvature, a single drop of spiderfish nerve venom fell from rafter to parchment. Iralian touched quill to the stain, then to tongue, for scholars taste ink to test flow. His limbs seized. The starglass cracked beneath his falling weight. The yard lost its guiding star calculus, vessels launched with flawed hulls, and half the Dominion fleet foundered months later off Oridon's reefs, claimed by storms as if the sea itself conspired. Where storms rose, profit also gathered. Speakers sold insurance to merchants fearing unseen blades. They groomed minor lords who, emboldened by Brotherhood backing, trimmed away dissidents, then paid fresh coin to silence their former allies. Yet Sevrosa's greater balancing remained her central vision. She saw Tamriel's powers like weighted stones on a jeweler's scale. Each death nudged the pans until the beam rested level. Prime for a larger calamity only the void would welcome. Few grasped her endgame, but all obeyed, for the mother's lullaby grew sharper each season, and Sevrosa alone claimed to interpret it without error. Her next directive steered knives north into Skyrim. The old holds had grown fractious since the decline of dragon cult remnants. Jarls jostled each other, and the High King's voice grew hoarse, shouting unity. Yet among them, Jarl Ulfra Bluewolf of Windhelm threatened to consolidate east marches through charismatic war feasts and cultural revival. A rising Eastern Bloc risked dragging the Western holds into counter-alliances, perhaps sparking a civil cleft decades too early for the Void's designs. To maintain equilibrium, Ulfra needed silencing before her charisma crossed the Geralt passes. Conveniently, her court harbored a secret, the Jarl's heir, Yorich, sired by a bard not of noble blood. Imperial spy masters coveted proof. Brotherhood archivists already possessed it. Speaker Vale del Rene arranged for that knowledge to surface in a controlled sprawl. a courier delivered anonymous parchments to the mead hall of rival Jarl Vighard. Gravelbrow. Vighard, prideful, challenged Ulfra publicly during the next moot. Under Skyrim's laws, her only defense lay in trial by arms. Combat, she would likely win. The Brotherhood's silencer, known only as Skuld the Breathless, ensured otherwise. Disguised as Vighard's shield thane, Skuld coated the challenge-ground stone with a transparent oil that turned to slick ice under foot warmth. During the duel, Ulfra slipped half a toe's width. Vighard's axe cleaved her helm. Witnesses called it divine judgment. In truth, it was calculated physics married to coinless obedience. Skyrim's Jarls splintered thereafter into cautious stalemate. High King Svargrim, content to rule by indolence, ceded day-to-day bickering rather than martial war. Again, stability held at the cost of singular life. Again, the opportunists chafed. Crowwing's private coterie of profit-minded speakers whispered that balancing prevented windfalls. Chaos, not stasis, lured wealthy patrons. Sevrosa countered by pointing to full coffers. They were not destitute. Yet Crowwing's dissent remained ember-hot, ready to kindle should the listener misstep. Misstep came not from Sevrosa, but from fate. A lull in major contracts left restless blades seeking tests of prowess. Two silencers, Zario, the painted grim, and Fjorild Ashmane, accepted overlapping petitions in Rihad, unaware their targets sheltered beneath the same roof. At midnight, each cornered prey. Upon discovering the conflict, they obeyed Tenet 5 and refrained from slaying a brother, but their presence alerted City Watch. Both fled, Fjorild wounded, and left behind enough evidence that Yokudan magistrates deduced Brotherhood hand. The Crown of Hammerfell, eager to rally fractious forebears and crowns, decried the cult. Bounties soared, city coffers open to mercenaries. A smaller order might have withdrawn. Sevrosa saw opportunity. She convened a clandestine moot under moonless sky in the Ashaba Canyons. There, by torch sputter, she unveiled the doctrine of forlorn mercy. Should a province declare Brotherhood contract illegal, the speakers would amplify fear until that province begged return to pragmatic neutrality. In Hammerfell, this meant severing silent strings that had kept rival lordlings calm. Within a season, caravan raids increased, sabers flashed in street duels, and nobles quietly reached out through smugglers to repurchase Brotherhood aid. The edict dissolved in less than 2 years. Crowwing conceded the listener's foresight, but privately pondered if perpetual brinkmanship served the void, or merely Sevrosa's vanity. If Sevrosa sensed looming insurrection, she gave no sign. Instead, she focused on the single most audacious enterprise undertaken since the Sundering, the simultaneous culling of 3 monarchs whose alliances threatened to birth a tri-crown hegemony: High King Logrolf of Skyrim, King Vernis of Wayrest, and Potentate Dejori of Anaquina. Separately, these rulers were manageable. United by dynastic marriage, they could coordinate armies from Hammerfell sands to Skyrim snows. The listener decreed each death must occur within the same moon to avoid any one throne scrambling defenses against the next strike. 3 sanctuaries prepared. Logrolf's end fell to Skuld the Breathless, now infamous for ingenious stagecraft. During the annual Kyne's Frost pageant in Windhelm, Skuld masqueraded as a pyre builder. He laced the festival's ritual straw effigy with pockets of marsh gas collecting bladderwort fumes. When the effigy burned, it burst into a flower of blue flame, startling spectators. Amid the confusion, Skuld released Owl's Eclipse dust along the dais. Logrolf blinked, tears streaming, and collapsed. Too discreet for panic, too swift for suspicion. Physicians diagnosed heart failure induced by shock, a plausible tragedy on a freezing night. In Wayrest, Lysandra, now a seasoned maestros of misdirection, was summoned. The Navy's spring launch ceremony gathered nobles near the harbour's breakwater. She posed as a navigating scribe anxious to chart the newly christened frigate's keel lines. Hidden in her scroll tube rested a Dwemer spring needle tipped with coral toxin. When King Vernus approached to read the dedication plaque, Lysandra bowed low, accidentally brushing her sleeve against his hand. Hours later, he slumped in chambers mid-benediction, physicians confounded by veins gone glassy beneath skin, as if the sea itself had petrified his blood. Meanwhile, potentate Dazori's palace in Riverhold brimmed with Renridra pirates hired as archers. Speaker Cosma Levea from Leowin devised a poisonless kill, a message of cold artistry. She bribed the palace falconer to leave aviaries unlocked. In midnight hush, her assassin, Vaishian Shademarch, coaxed 3 silent viperhawks into a bamboo crate and carried them atop palace roof. On cue, he loosened straps. The raptors glided onto bedroom lintels, shedding serrated flight feathers that sliced like razors. The potentate, light sleeper, sat up into a storm of cutting wings. Dazori bled out before guards breached the door. No foreign blade touched him, yet the feathers bore microscopic files of paralytic, so he could not even cry out. The Brotherhood's hand remained rumor only, a rumor severe enough to deter forensic vengeance. Within 31 nights, 3 thrones emptied. Alliances dissolved under weight of funerary rites and scramble for succession. Sevrosa's triumphant lullaby echoed through sanctuaries, but triumph bred peril. Crowwing and his cohort claimed the listener risked galvanizing every crown into joint retaliation once patterns became obvious. They urged restraint, citing how coin decreased when kings feared too much to convene. Sevrosa dismissed concerns, and so the ember of dissent found dry moss. Fear for livelihood, bruised ego beneath her prophetic supremacy. While conspirators grumbled, the Night Mother's coffin completed another pilgrimage, south to the jungled tangle of Blackwood, into the newly excavated ossuary of Stirring Roots. There, amid perfumed rot of mangrove spurs, the coffin's brass bands tarnished green, and Frederick the Pale, archivist of the Sanguine Pause, recorded unusual fluctuations in the hush. He noted long tremors, a kind of sigh cresting the usual lullaby. When he reported these tremors to Sevrosa, she saw omen. The mother anticipated great blood. She convened the Black Hand at the ossuary, minus Speaker Crowwing, who pled distance and winter sickness. At Council's central platform, the coffin rested. Sevrosa placed her hand upon its lid and breathed so slow the torches seemed to dim. She announced the Void's command, a grand tableau of sacrifice. Every sanctuary must cull one of its own in offering, a ritual she called the Harvest of Hollow Echo. The tenets allowed for penitent killing but not arbitrary self-slayings. Speakers murmured protest. Sevrosa replied the order came from the coffin itself. Doubt darted between glances. None wished to label their listener deluded, yet many felt a coil of dread. When the meeting dispersed, whispers festered. Crowwing exploited these sentiments. Moving between cells under illusion of routine inspection, he gathered promises that should Sevrosa call for hollow harvest, they would refuse. Some pledged active rebellion, daring the prospect of purification. Crowwing, consummate strategist, meanwhile prepared a dossier of Sevrosa's excesses, kills outside contract, destabilization risking broad backlash. He planned to present these to the coffin, claiming its will had been misheard. Before confrontation could bloom, oblivion itself stirred. The plan-meld crisis, long foretold by Daedra logs, loomed on horizon, heralded by cults of Molag Bal, sabotaging town chapels. In this brewing horror, the Brotherhood observed fertile soil. War, panic, and desperation yield high demand for silent remedies. But the crisis also threatened sanctuaries. Anchors of stone and black iron fell from sky, rending ground. One such anchor crashed through Coral's echo cell network, exposing tunnels. Sevrosa redeployed resources to rescue archives, leaving some sanctuaries lightly guarded. Crowwing's sore moment. He convened 3 of 5 fingers, declared Sevrosa unfit, and in the mother's name set forth a purification writ for the Cheydinhal sanctuary, Sevrosa's home base. The writ reached Skuld the Breathless, ironically severing the assassin from loyalty to the very listener who often trusted him. Torn, Skuld travelled to Cheydinhal under guise of Legion deserter. He found the sanctuary half abandoned, archives boxed for evac, novices confused by anchor rumours. Entering the sacrificial chapel, he confronted Sevrosa alone. Chronicles differ on their words. Some say she welcomed death as prelude to hollow harvest, others that she denounced Crowwing's treachery and tried to sway Skuld with revelations never recorded. What is known, Skuld drew no hush steel. Instead, he unsheathed a bone awl, a scribe's tool, and pierced the listener's heart in 3 shallow thrusts, carving a triangle symbolic of void-made flesh. He wept while she bled, then set manuscripts ablaze to mask evidence. Crowwing's coup seemed complete, yet the corpse of Sevrosa never reached the coffin. Flames consumed all but ash. Without her body, formal succession could not bury her within sarcophagus lineage. This omission, later brothers claimed, sparked an echo of anguished hush radiating across Dream Communion. Novices across Tamriel awoke screaming from nightmares of singing coffins whose lids flapped like wings. Speakers found themselves unable to enter trance, some describing an empty black louder than any whisper. The mother had gone silent, or perhaps screamed beyond hearing. Governance stalled, contracts lapsed, coins starved. Crowwing scrambled to assert order, but the tenets provided no guide for a hand-missing listener's interred witness. Panic rumbled like undersea quake. Into this vacuum stepped Adelaine, scribe of knots. She embarked on pilgrimage to every sanctuary, carrying only a leather-bound codex stitched with spider silk root. At each stop, she challenged speakers to recall Sevrosa's final pronouncements. Page by page, she compiled accounts, cross-referencing phrases, reconstructing what she claimed was the true harvest directive. Not self-slaughter, but the pruning of those who placed profit over cosmic balance, meaning opportunists behind the coup. Her articulation, delivered in calm voice, mesmerized. Many remembered Sevrosa's steady guidance and felt guilt. Adelaine did not demand fealty. She knelt before the coffin in stirring roots and prayed for the hush. On the third dusk, the coffin answered, a single throb like wind in a catacomb flute. Witnesses swore brass hoops quivered. When they opened the lid, a blasphemy reserved for crisis, they found Sevrosa's spectral imprint woven like frost onto interior silk. Silhouette, curled, wings bent. The sign could not be denied. The mother mourned her listener. Adelaine accepted mantle reluctantly, or so legends shaped it. She assumed name listener emeritus and issued first edict, the purification of Crowwing and all conspirators. Across provinces, silencers woke to find black seals pinned by daggers to their pillows, each inscribed by Adelaine's star-thread calligraphy. The killing of speakers is rare. The killing of a fellow Black Hand member, rarer still. Over 1 month of Night of Splintered Tongues, conspirators fell. One poisoned by Owl's Eclipse dust poured into his inkwell. Another stuffed inside a reliquary. At Wayrest Harbour, heart removed and replaced with a coiled parchment reading balance. Crowwing himself fled into Hrothgar's snow wastes, guide murdered, rations missing. His frozen body surfaced in spring thaw, throat closed by a spider silk root knot. The signature of Adelaine returned to avenge her first teacher, Lysandra, who Crowwing once undermined. With the coup quenched, the Brotherhood reeled. Adelaine abolished the title of opportunist, decreeing that henceforth every contract must serve at least one axis of balance, remove tyranny, forestall apocalypse, or redress blasphemous hubris. Coin remained essential, but if motive lacked, cosmic resonance, the hand would deny. Some feared poverty. Yet events of the planemeld soon overwhelmed fright. Molagbal's anchors fell without pattern. Void-touched abominations roamed. City fathers and temple priests begged for silent removal of cult leaders, offering relics instead of gold. The Brotherhood obliged, seeing in Daedric incursion an offense to Void's primacy. Entropy must remain impartial, not inflicted by dominion of one prince. During Siege of Bruma, a cluster of anchors threatened to merge, forging a gateway irreversible. Imperial battle mages prepared suicidal counter-ritual, but Adelaine's silencers slit throats of anchor priests moments before conjuration apex, toppling the ritual. Legion annals record an unknown benefactor, but a black handprint seared into chapel door left message enough. Not for praise did the Brotherhood act. Adelaine believed such interventions kept cosmic ledger balanced, ensuring no single force usurped the mother's hush. Acts like these, neither purely mercenary nor strictly altruistic, confused historians for centuries. Some labeled the Brotherhood secret guardians, others saw self-serving marketing. Internally, debates persisted. If they prevented cataclysm, were they still agents of dissolution? Adelaine argued that entropy without structure is meaningless. What mattered was that every life still ended, every realm eventually fell. Their role was to shepherd cadence, not to hasten extinction all at once, nor to spare indefinitely. In simple terms, a gardener prunes that the garden may grow yet, never outgrow death. Under her philosophy, the order recovered prestige. Petitions soared anew. Nobles sought fairness in vendettas, priests entreaties against Daedric collaborators, commoners vengeance for war orphans. Adelaine established arbitration chambers where speakers vetted motives. If petitioners' wrath sprang from greed alone, contract cost tripled. If motive aligned with cosmic correction, ending cruel dynast, the fee reduced. Such pricing fostered perception that Brotherhood served principle beyond coin, even as coffers filled, but principle incurred risk. One late frostfall evening, a Nord farmer named Helgund, son of Halder, raised the sacrament against Baroness Tiana of Markarth, whose tithes starved his hold. Speakers judged the plea righteous, accepted reduced payment in mead barrels. Yet Tiana, cunning, had earlier paid generous bribe to a different sanctuary for protection. Conflict of contract hovered. To honor both deals, Adelaine devised compromise, Harbinger's paradox. She ordered assassination proceed, but after completion, the sanctuary that took Tiana's protection must refund double her bribe to heirs and publicly claim negligence. The kill occurred. Tiana, slain by a pebble of hush steel, flicked from high ridge into her open mouth while she cursed tax clerks. The protection sanctuary, humiliated and bankrupt, learned lesson. Coin cannot outweigh balance. Complaint lodged. To Black Hand ended with that sanctuary's speaker demoted and assigned to Hollowvale custodian duty, wiping dream sedge residue from novices' palates. Balance, however, is fragile. Year by year, Adelaine's heavy curation impeded profit strategies similar to Crowwing's. Younger blades, eager for acclaim, chafed at philosophical oversight. They saw more opportunities in the friction of post-planemeld reconstruction, where city-states hired mercenaries to suppress refugees, where hunger drove men to dark deeds. Some fraternized with underworld cartels trafficking skooma, trading assassination for smugglers' gold without speaker approval. Tenet breaches multiplied. Adelaine sensed rot. She revived ancient rite of vain touch vigils, random nocturnal checks where the listener, masked and silent, appeared within sanctum sleeping quarters, touching each assassin's wrist to feel pulse cadence. A heart galloping from guilt betrayed unreported kills. Punishments ranged from finger removal to assignment as corpse washer. Morale dipped, but discipline tightened. Even so, cracks widened unseen. In Braville, a silencer named Lucrate Ania haunted by the screams of anchor victims, sought to redeem by sparing own target after discovering the man endeavored to fund orphanages. She faked death with blood files, but the lie unraveled. Captured by a Black Hand tribunal, she was offered penance through self-sacrifice. Instead, she fled, leaking Brotherhood symbols to 7th Legion interceptors. Legion scribes decoded fragments, learning of Starthread calligraphy, of 10-score coffers. They mounted raids, sanctuaries burned at Dawnstar and Gideon, coffers confiscated. Yet Legion Quartermaster General Gaius Quint saw political hazard in publicizing cult secrets that might terrify citizens. He sealed evidence inside white gold catacombs where it languished, studied by few, actionable by none. Nevertheless, fear seeped within Brotherhood ranks. If one silencer could betray, how many more might waver under ghosts of kills amassed? Adelaine convened scholars to craft Remedy, the Mirror of Still Recollection, a midnight meditation chamber lined with obsidian panes. Assassins sat naked within, blood of latest marks smeared over brows. They recited inverted litany phrases until self-loathing surfaced, then listened for the mother's hush to absolve or harden heart. Many emerged clear-minded, a few clawed at eyes, driven mad by reflection of void gazing back. These unfortunates were escorted to the ossuary, entombed alive in pockets sealed by bone runes so their whispers might nourish Mother eternally. Brutal, yet voluntary. The choice to enter Mirror signified devotion deeper than fear of outcome. Throughout these inner turmoils, Tamriel's outer world edged toward a fresh cycle of empire-shaking strife. The Rayman restorationists rallied. In Cyrodiil, the Dureni, once again, whispered about reasserting hegemony over High Rock. Nibn Bay trade consortiums funded mercenaries to protect caravans from Reachfolk incursions. Each faction eyed the Brotherhood warily, some considering alliances, others preemptive extermination campaigns. Adelaine maintained neutrality, but she also understood that neutrality might appear favor to whichever adversary the Brotherhood declined to attack. Thus she orchestrated her most complex contract web yet, a triple chain of conditional killings, triggered by each other. Should Rayman restorationists attempt coup, their leader would fall to a poison keyed only to a microdistillation of geranium tears, an alchemical concoction stored at Coral Sanctuary. Should Nibn Bay consortiums hire assassins against Dureni envoys, the Dureni's crestbearer would die by arrow while riding a specific road. Conversely, if Dureni schemed first, the consortium treasurer would meet Hushsteel. These mirrored threats, invisible but real, created stalemate. No faction risked first blood, for rumor of Brotherhood contingencies spread through espionage circles like frost. In that enforced pause, an unlikely diplomatic summit convened at the Ayleid ruin of Vilverin. Agreements signed there prevented a decade of war. The Brotherhood's hand in peace remained invisible, yet inarguable. Stories such as these seldom colour popular tales, for minstrels prefer heroic charges to quiet staid blades. Yet among scholars with ears to certain corridors, the phrase the Vilverin equilibrium came to signify unseen deterrence, the notion that whisper of assassination can hold at bay armies where treaties alone fail. It cemented the Brotherhood's reputation not only as hired killers, but paradoxically as regulators of cataclysm. Still, equilibrium is itself a temporary state in a cosmos whose ultimate destiny is dissolution. Sithis desires the tapestry, frayed, not preserved. Adelaine's long stewardship, marked by chastened opportunists and curated kills, began to look suspiciously like guardianship rather than service to the void. A new generation, raised on forgeries of crow wings, suppressed manifestos, contended that Adelaine acted the goddess, denying larger entropy for her aesthetic of balance. Beneath their criticism lurked raw impatience. Wars and chaos promised grander narratives, deeper pockets. In the metallurgical forges of Markarth, 3 such malcontents, Keric Graveldust, his sister Maliara, and the Nord alchemist Brynjard, Tallow Bite, perfected Silver Void alloy, a blade matrix merging moonstone, meteoric iron, and vitae extracted from vampiric thralls. Silver Void cut not just flesh, but memory, severing soul fragments before Arkay's call could claim them. They envisioned a new era where memory itself could be traded as commodity. Warlords would pay fortunes to erase ancestors of rivals from collective remembrance. To this heresy, requested by no petition, they sought the coffin's blessing. They claimed to hear approval. Others heard nothing. When speakers dismissed their zeal, the trio rebelled, turning prototypes on fellow assassins. 2 sanctuaries bled shaded silver that night. Victims left memory hollows so wide that scribes forgot how to mourn them. Adelaine's response would shape final years of Second Era. She declared the sanguinary edict. Any weapon interfering with soul's migration usurped the Dread Father's prerogative, for entropy required dissolution of being, not nullification of ever was. Silencers fanned across reach, hunting Graveldust insurgents. Battles erupted in underground lodes, where silver veins glittered against torchlight like malignant constellations. In one skirmish, Silencer Fjorild, veteran of Rihad mishap, impaled Maliara with void salt-tipped javelin, only to watch her wound seal, memory-slicing blade she carried reversing casualty upon attacker. Desperate, Fjorild detonated packets of hist sap flash powder, collapsing the cavern, burying them both. Such mutual destructions painted the edict's pages crimson. For perhaps the first time since the Morag Tong Wars, brothers hunted brothers in open-pitched combat. The uprising climaxed beneath Lake Honrich in caverns earlier used by Foam Knife Courtyard. Keric Graveldust, by then half mad from repeated use of memory-eating daggers, fashioned a rough altar of victim skulls and addressed an unseen Night Mother he believed preferred his enterprise. Adelaine entered alone, via flooded sluice, wearing armor of blackened reeds improbable as shield yet sleek for swimming. The duel that followed passed into whispered legend. Silent parries reflected in still water. Sparks of silver void blade snuffed by Adelaine's thread knife that parted air with scarcely ripple. In final exchange, she bound him with star thread, loops, reciting litany until his mind frayed, unable to recall his own name. She left him kneeling, memory shorn, soul intact, but identity dissolved, a fate both merciful and cruel. The edict concluded with trials for remaining conspirators. Some accepted penance, others executed. In aftermath, Adelaine convened the Black Hand atop Gerald High Pass, open sky, no sanctum sails, to announce new directive. The Brotherhood must remember it is not steward of stasis, nor vanguard of chaos but instrument. Blade drawn at moment when cosmos inhales, returned to sheath as it exhales. Kills must follow breath of world, not whims of profit or fear. She vowed upon Sevrosa's spectral imprint to step aside the moment she misheard. The hush. Her declaration eased tensions, but also foretold departure. Indeed, not 10 years later, Adelaine vanished during a routine pilgrimage between Coral and Cheydinhall. Horse found grazing roadside, saddle empty, thread knife stuck in soil pointing north. Some believe she ascended, accepted bodily into void. Others that Sigic vengeance plucked her from timeline. The coffin offered no clarity. Whispers fell silent for a generation. In that vacancy, smaller voices would rise, some noble, some corrosive, leading the Brotherhood toward the tumults of late Third Era, where imperial blood and Daedric fire would test every tenet in ways ancestors never imagined. For now, however, the web still thrummed, its strands reknitted after coup and uprising, spanning Tamriel like hairline fractures in a perfect pane of glass. A courier in Colovia bowed over rice paper bearing a single name. A speaker in the vale sealed a 10-score, coffer with sigh. Far below, in moss-veiled ossuary, the coffin slept. Brass rings dull, silk interior faintly etched with lingering silhouettes of listeners past, awaiting the next heartbeat of world, the next breath drawn in hush, the next tiny flicker of life whose extinguishing might keep balance, or tilt it, or simply feed the endless patient void. Across Tamriel, chapels tall as oak groves and shrines small as river stones speak of the gods in marble, melody, and fragrant incense. The Dark Brotherhood speaks of only one God, and it speaks in silence. To discern that silence, its boundaries, its hunger, its strange consolations, we must step back from daggers and coin, back even from the coffin bride and her lullaby, until only the oldest cosmogonies remain. This chapter walks that inward spiral, tracing how an order of mortal killers came to believe their every cut echoes the first great wound in the fabric of existence. Most creation myths known to scholars begin with two principles locked in tension. The Elnafi tongue names them Anu, the stasis, and Padme, the change. Anu dreamed calm possibility. Padme stirred dream into motion. Some cultures cast them as brothers, others as lovers, still others as breath drawn in and breath let go. Where they touched, sparks formed spirits, worlds, and the long perilous dance of time. The void, called Nothing in Ayleid glyphs, Ghoul in Yokudan star charts, was not simply absence surrounding those partners. It was, in primordial regard, the true canvas. An endless, formless dark upon which even the sparks of the Etada shone only briefly before dimming. It is here the Brotherhood roots its theology. They teach that Sithis, hissed like air leaking from a cracked amphora, is not Padome itself, nor Anu's antithesis, but the distilled intent of the void. Where Anu dreams of enduring shapes and Padme of shifting shapes, Sithis desires no shapes at all. A Breton theologian once likened this to an artist who, upon glimpsing her finished painting, feels an irresistible urge to tear the canvas apart so the colours may rejoin raw potential. The comparison flatters mortal sensibility, but captures the mood. Sithis is the impulse that unmakes. To worship such a principle, the Brotherhood contends, is to accept that all structures, cities, crowns, ideas, flesh, are temporary set pieces awaiting soft applause of oblivion. Yet how does one pray to a hunger? Early Morag Tong scrolls, though later condemned as heresy, record nightmares in which initiates tried to commune directly with Sithis. The void answered not in words but in rattling terror that left minds fissured. Understanding followed only when Mephalah's subtlety threaded path between soundless gulf and fragile mortal senses. Where Sithis devours, Mephalah weaves. Her webs map out safe approach so the worshipper may glimpse abyss without falling. It was through such webs, the Brotherhood attests, that the Night Mother emerged, not a goddess in her own right, but a vessel. She is coffin and bride and interlocutor, holding within her desiccated womb a pinhole through which the void whispers human syllables. Some sects claim she originated as Dunmerry matron sacrificed with her children, others that she is fiction personified by cult need. The Brotherhood regards both tales as anecdotal dressing. What matters is function. She hears pleas, translates them into hunger, and returns command tempered enough for flesh to bear. Because her coffin tours sanctuaries, each resting site becomes momentary locus where void presses nearest mundus. Assassins kneel inside that thinning membrane, their breathing slowed to align with pulse of absence. Over centuries, the Order codified postures and chants to draw hush deeper into marrow. The most common posture, cowl of the seedless, requires kneeling on left knee, right heel tucked against spine, fingers interlaced behind skull. The spine arch exposes throat, the Brotherhood's favored wound site, symbolizing voluntary surrender of voice to silence. While held thus, aspirants recite the opening couplet, first in external whisper, then internally, until inner ear alone hears it. From stillness we were cast. To stillness we return. Novices learn the line in 10 languages, not for ceremonies. Show, but to soften cadence for any tongue a TTS reader might misplace. In Gel, the Argonian version is rendered Thithiseth, ba crass, Thithiseth, Bayivok. The sibilants stretch like reed wind, training speaker to exhale across teeth with neither hiss nor hush cut short. What flows after the opening couplet varies. Some sanctuaries intone whole canticles describing cosmic fissures. Others prefer a direct period of unsounded contemplation. Whatever the form, the goal is dissolution of self-narrative. The listener's trance depends on drifting where personal memory loosens, allowing coffin lullaby to braid thought. That lullaby is never sung aloud, yet scribes approximate it as a pattern of expanding and contracting intervals. Longer gaps than speech requires, shorter than natural silence. Listeners emerge speaking instructions couched in plain directive. A name, a place, a time. They rarely remember full melody. They know only that void has tasted fresh entropy and designated vessel to gather it. Blood, therefore, is token rather than currency. When blade meets flesh, the Brotherhood believes the victim's animating spark, his anuic coherence, ruptures. The spurted blood is merely mundus residue. The true offering is unseen, a thread clipped so the tapestry slackens. This explains why sloppy slaughter, or so-called indulgent carnage, is discouraged. Excess spill clouds the metaphysical clarity of the moment. A single clean line accomplishes void's will. Anything more feeds only the killer's vanity, an affront bordering on heresy. Thus, even when contracts target entire households, assassins move room to room in hush, granting each life its own distinct parting. They call it counting the starlings, alluding to reach folklore, in which a shepherd must honor each bird he slays, lest the flock haunt night skies as disordered constellation. Because intention proves crucial, the Brotherhood invests enormous care in ritual precision. Consider the Black Sacrament's ingredients. Scholars often reduce them to gruesome inventory: nightshade petals, a heart, and a likeness of bone. But each component holds symbolic physics. Nightshade embodies transition. Its berries lull bodily functions towards stillness. The heart, center of mortal rhythm, is offered so that target's rhythm may cease. Bone effigy acknowledges material, likeness. By piercing it, the petitioner coaxes void to pierce its living mirror. When recited incantation frames these tokens, the Night Mother's pinhole expands just enough for contract to slide through. Location matters too. Older grimoires advise performing rite within liminal spaces, thresholds, riverbanks at ebb tide, doorways between prayer hall and graveyard. Such margins resonate with Sithis' nature as boundary eraser. Within sanctuaries, a parallel rite welcomes fresh recruits. Named the Quietening, it unfolds in 3 stages reflecting triune cosmology: form, motion, dissolution. The novice first builds a miniature sand mandala depicting Orbic wheel. Next, with a single breath, they blow pattern into shapeless whirl, showing acceptance that order decays. Finally, they prick finger and let one drop of blood fall into swirling sand. If droplet vanishes without trace, absorbed rather than pooled, they are deemed ready. No sorcery hides beneath this test. Porousness of sand usually swallows fluid. Yet recruits trembling with doubt often misjudge height. Drop breaks surface tension. Stain lingers. Symbolic or not, the effect convinces them failure springs from inner hesitation. One might ask, though rhetorically forbidden in Brotherhood recitations, How souls fare in this doctrine. Tamrielic pantheons teach that Arche shepherds the dead, that ancestors linger, that heroic Nords ascend Sovngarde. The Brotherhood replies, all these passages occur within the tapestry still tethered to somethingness. Sithis' work begins where these roads end. When an assassin severs life by ritual, they do not detour soul from rightful afterlife. They accelerate its inevitable slide past all waiting heavens into void beneath. Theological debates ignite here. Arche priests claim this. Belief desecrates natural cycle. Brotherhood theologians retort Arche himself places coffin in tomb, not to preserve but to remind living that flesh breaks. The argument circles endlessly, each side convinced of possessing deeper compassion. Amid such metaphysics, lesser Daedra occasionally sniff at borders. Clavicus Vile might offer a contract for some Baroque vengeance. Boethia cultists might promise favors for high-profile bloodletting. The Black Hand instructs caution. Accept no pact that reroutes kill energy toward Prince's glory. Doing so would starve Void and break Tenet 1. Historical record lists only 2 verified deviations. The first, during late Riemann period, saw a speaker strike bargain with Periite to unleash plague upon dissenting sanctuary. Corpses fed entropy, but plague's indiscriminate spread threatened cosmic balance. Subsequent purification erased entire line of that speaker's apprentices. Second incident, centuries later, involved petty arrangement with Namira worshippers for cadavers in exchange for protection. Listener Adelaine herself ended that alliance, citing creed that consumption of flesh recycles form, thus delaying true dissolution. Not all intersections with other faiths prove adversarial. In Valenwood, some green-packed Bosma brothers contend their kills feed the green, whose cycle too involves decay and rebirth. Their rituals omit nightshade, taboo plant in Bosmary diet, and substitute rotted heartwood carved into likeness of prey. The mother accepts variation so long as intention remains pure. Likewise, Argonian shadow scales mingle Sithis veneration with their Hist's deep dreams, suggesting trees and void commune beyond language. These syncretic practices raised eyebrows among earlier purists, but survived scrutiny for one simple reason: they work. The void neither demands uniformity nor tolerance. It merely accepts that paths diverge on way to same negation. Each sanctuary's library houses commentaries on metaphysical underpinnings. The Threnody Codex of Cheydinhall collects parables illustrating void supremacy. One tale describes a Khajiit, thief facing execution. Offered last meal, he consumes raw moon sugar and sings until rope coils. As trapdoor drops, he whispers thanks not to Alkosh for time given, but to Sithis for end of counting. The lesson: even uninitiated may glimpse comfort in final hush. Another parable, the Dunmer poem, Vale of Varden, tells of fishermen devoured by slaughterfish who praises Sithis that bones scatter freely, unburdened by house burial rites. Such stories reassure assassins haunted by compassion. They recast killing not as theft, but as reluctant duty releasing souls from narrative burdens. The Brotherhood, however, does not ignore suffering left behind. They maintain order of weepers, sisters, and brothers tasked with tending grief borne by petitioners once vengeance complete. Weepers travel incognito, leaving sprigs of ghost time on doorsteps, murmuring lullabies known to soothe nightmare. Their presence underscores creed. Entropy nurtured properly leads to serenity, not chaos. Some outside historians misinterpret these acts as guilt. Internally, they are logistical. A petitioner who feels closure is less likely to confess dealings. Yet many weepers report personal conviction that gentle closure honors void more than lingering despair. They reference a line from the veiled commentary, "Let the wound ache once, then seal." Rot unchecked breeds noise. Noise, in Brotherhood vocabulary, is clutter distorting hush. A scream is noise, but so too is political turmoil outsized to necessary cut. The art lies in creating silence shaped like target's absence, nothing more. Perhaps the most esoteric branch of their theology explores what lies beyond total dissolution. Standard dogma holds void indifferent, neither afterlife nor consciousness. A minority sect, the Orbic Nullists, propose that fragments shed by murdered lives swirl within void until density births new possibility, repeating cosmic cycle. These Nullists argue assassins perform creative function, harvesting seeds for future cosmos. Mainline doctrine dismisses notion as a Newick nostalgia creeping back. Still, Nullist meditation techniques influence modern hollow veil rituals, teaching assassins to visualize falling not into black emptiness, but into wide, starless gulf pregnant with prelight. The sensory paradox, darkness that feels full, helps novices relax into kills requiring patience measured in days. To ground lofty speculation, the Order maintains meticulous taxonomy of wounds and their metaphysical yield. A straight throat, slice yields quick hush, believed to dispatch soul with minimal intermediate echoes. A puncture through heart, termed crimson gate, delays dissolution by single breath, trapping spark in trembling muscles. Useful if assassin needs victim to stagger publicly before collapse. Poison deaths vary. Slow toxins allow existential dread to mount, producing what scribes call shivering echo, a psychic residue that tends to clump around scene, attracting inquisitors. For this reason, speakers select method based on aftermath requirements. Efficiency for high security kill, spectacle for message, lingering fear for deterrence. The taxonomy grows denser still when considering lunar phases, star charts, even water salinity near kill site. A murder beneath new moon grants pale silence, harder for necromancers to trace. Under full massa and secunda, death births mirror echo, doubling probability that dreams about victim will ripple among acquaintances, potentially sowing extra tension. Brotherhood calculators referencing Dwemer tonal mathematics predict such echoes with startling accuracy. They adjust schedules accordingly, weaving kills into planetary choir unheard by common folk. All these frameworks rely on unbroken chain of communion between listener and mother. When Adelaine vanished and hush fell silent, metaphysical order trembled. Throats cut still bled, victims still died, but assassins felt kills land dull, like blades striking wet clay. Journals from that silent generation note recurring nightmares of marks who rose again, eyes empty, wandering sanctuaries muttering half-remembered prayers. Scholars now believe such visions sprang from anxiety, yet at time they spurred emergency councils. The Black Hand, lacking listener, debated appointing triune oracle, a committee reading whispers collectively. They ultimately decided void abhors committees. Resolution came years later when a young imperial orphan named Pelusin Mar, cleaning cellars in abandoned Cheydinhall Hall, discovered a faint lullaby beneath his heartbeat. Hearing grew stronger until he entered trance without training, reciting names of long-dead listeners in exact order. Verification trials convinced senior speakers the mother had chosen anew. His ascension restored communion, illustrating theological axiom. Void chooses path of least story. It plucked from obscurity, proving again that bloodlines, reputation, philosophy matter little. One needs only an ear attuned to hush. As newly minted listener, Mar championed educational treatise titled Concordance of Still Refractions, distilling complex metaphysics into syllabi readable by TTS without stumbling over archaic glyphs. He demanded speakers memorize phonetic annotations so recitation remained clear. For instance, he spelled Anuiel as Anu-el, when addressing novices from Black Marsh, minimizing accent confusion. Clarity, he held, honored hush. Mispronunciation generated needless ripples. His pedantry annoyed veterans, yet produced cohort of recruits whose inner monologue paced evenly, enhancing stealth discipline. Breathing synced to syllable count. Footsteps mirrored cadence. Kills felt like punctuation rather than shock. Ma's tenure also refined understanding of body. Disposal as theological gesture. Common practice reduced corpses to ash, scattering them on running water so soul residue diluted quickly. Ma argued each element holds unique void vector. Water symbolizes flow, air evaporation, earth compression, fire acceleration. Choosing, disposal element could modulate ambient echo. Water eased sorrow, earth anchored caution, fire spread dread. Subsequent field reports confirmed trend. When Durrani Prince assassinated and body immolated, surviving kin grew paranoid, constructing fortress hallways too narrow for commerce. Conversely, a merchant lord, drowned discreetly, left his estate to heirs who settled debts and reopened orphan granaries, causing minimal upheaval. Speakers now designate element based on contract's strategic horizon. For all scholarly structure, Brotherhood theology retains one irreducible facet: uncertainty. The void offers no prophecy, only appetite. Listeners interpret, speakers transmit, silencers enact. Any link can warp message. The Order addresses this by institutionalizing doubt. At dawn, after significant kill, assassins gather for reflection of unwound thread, candle placed between each pair. Flame watched until first flicker. That flicker might mean nothing, or hint that kill jarred some unseen balance. Participants then share dreams, bodily sensations, coincidences encountered. Patterns tracked across. Sanctuaries sometimes reveal misalignment. Two killings echoing same political fault line, for instance. In such case, a corrective contract may follow to restore hush amplitude. Detractors call this superstition. Insiders counter that centuries of practice prove efficacy. Even mistakes fold into doctrine. Legend tells of Brotherhood blade who misheard. Target's name, slaying beloved poet instead of tyrant patron. For weeks, city streets brimmed with elegies. Grief-stricken masses toppled tyrant themselves. The Black Hand, seeing entropy served albeit indirectly, declared poet's death a dark mosaic, a kill whose full design only void perceives. Codicil now advises calm if error spreads greater hush than intended, provided tenets remain unbroken. In the Fourth Era, when Brotherhood faces near extinction following civil wars and internal betrayal, surviving cells rely on these theological skeletons. Coffers lost, sanctuaries closed, but belief persists. Every quiet blade continues cosmic arithmetic begun before Kalpus steered constellations. And should final sanctuary fall, adherents trust that someone somewhere will whisper sweet mother over effigy of bone and petals. The void needs no temples, only names and breath to carry them. Thus the theology of blood and void completes its circuit. It begins in cosmic fissure, narrows into coffin cradle, flows through ritual practice, and diffuses back into silent dusk of all things. An assassin draws dagger not in malice, nor for gold alone, but to honor promise older than stars. Forms break, stories cease, and hush will have the final word. That hush, tasted once, haunts the edges of every lullaby and every last gasp, reminding Tamriel that beneath towers and treaties sleeps an eternal hush. Patient, tireless, unbound. Twilight settled upon a Tamriel grown weary of its own pulse, and across the breadth of the empire, autumn fires flickered in hearths, while silent embers gathered unseen in the corridors beneath. In those corridors, the sanctuaries of the Dark Brotherhood, the calm exhalations of assassins echoed like distant surf, measured and somber, for the Order had entered an era not of growth, but of attrition. The third era neared its 4th century. Legion banners still caught the morning sun atop the white gold tower, yet cracks, hair-fine but inexorable, had begun to vein the marble. Where once the Brotherhood watched the shifting of thrones from a vantage of balance, it now felt each tremor shiver through its own bones, as though the tapestry frayed by history tugged equally upon hunter and hunted. The troubles began without. Clamour, almost politely, in the sub-chambers of the Anvil Sanctuary. There, a speaker named Hadrian Gorn sifted reports of imperial unrest, a rise in smuggling along the Gold Coast, a subtle thinning of temple arms, murmurs of cults devoted to an obscure Lord of Dawn. Such data normally passed to the listener for slow consideration, but the listener of that season, Pelusin Mar, was deep in trance, seeking faint lullabies through fog of growing political noise. Gorn, faced with delays, chose a rare initiative. He accepted 3 contracts without routing them through the customary dream verification. 2 succeeded cleanly. The third, drawn by a minor noble seeking inheritance, miscarried. The intended. Mark slipped away, alerted by unknown whisper, and a city watch patrol stumbled upon the assassin during retreat. Swords flashed, a brother fell. The Black Hand was forced to pay hush money to silence the investigation. The incident by itself was small, yet it loosened a thread. In Braville, the listener awoke troubled, unable to discern whether the coffin's silence was disapproval or mere fatigue. Within moons, another thread unwound, this time in Sentinel, where a jealous duke bribed a sanctuary with noblesse pieces from ancient Yakuda. The speakers accepted, unaware the coins bore malachite dust tainted by rottinite alchemy, a subtle tracer long used by royal guard alchemists. The guard followed the residue to the sanctuary doors and raised its outer cellars with star oil fire. The brothers within escaped through sub-tunnels, but the loss of archives and poisons cut deep. Across the network, voices began to mutter that the void, so clear for centuries, now came through crackling, like distant thunder muffled by fog. It was then that the doctrine of purification resurfaced, an austere remedy first etched during the age of the dustfoot scribe, yet rarely enacted. Purification demanded that when a sanctuary's integrity faltered beyond repair, a silencer chosen by the Black Hand must enter and slaughter every brother and sister, sparing none, cleansing, rot so new seed might sprout untainted. The rite's very mention chilled hallways. Even veteran blades lowered their gaze, recalling that the mother consumed her own children before eternity would claim them. Yet the Black Hand in this season felt cornered by blunders. They adopted purification not as mythic last resort, but as practical instrument. Cheydinhal lay first in their sights. That sanctuary, once hallowed by Ethruin Gloamtongue, later cherished by Sevrosa, had of late grown lax beneath a succession of speakers who favoured coin over cadence. Debts to skooma traffickers ran thick as marsh channels. Novices boasted of kills in local taverns. The great library of tactics sat dust-choked and unconsulted. From the coffin in Braville, the listener heard only a single syllable, repeated thrice. Hush. The Black Hand chose a silencer of iron reputation, Lucien Lachance, Lucien Lachorn, whose measured step and obsidian glove inspired equal dread and devotion. Lachance rode to Cheydinhal on a moonless night, lantern hooded, breath pluming like thin smoke. He crossed the threshold and greeted each brother by name, offering soft reassurance that reforms, not ruin, approached. They believed him, for his voice held the calm of morning snow. At deepest watch, as they slept, he released a vial of violet, vapor brewed from owl's eclipse spores and ghost ribs fungus. Those who woke did so drifting, their lungs wrapped in cold silk, their eyes dimming as Lachance moved from bunk to bunk with whispering blade. By dawn, only the sanctuary's stone remained, Yet even perfection sows consequence. Among the murdered had been a young Nord named Astrid's lover, and though grief lay years before igniting her future rebellion, its ember sparked here. More immediate was the silence that followed. The listener expected the hush of approval, but the coffin remained inert. No lullaby, no shiver of unseen cloth. Black Hand counselors exchanged wary looks, each wondering whether purge satisfied void, or stripped the order of voices it required to listen. Worse tremors brewed beyond the Brotherhood's tunnels. In Glenpoint, Emperor Uriel Septim VII survived his first assassination attempt by mystery assailants. Royal missives suspected pirates, Stormcloak radicals, Kvatch zealots. Yet the Black Hand knew no contract had been filed within their halls, and that knowledge unnerved them. Killers outside Creed could topple the imperial scale they claimed to tune. Meanwhile, cult gatherings in caverns of Colovia swelled under crimson banners depicting sunrise eclipsed by sickle moon. The mythic dawn, though still obscure, began, purchasing black market soul gems in volumes that pricked even the Brotherhood's broad network of eyes. LeChance, guilt-touched or merely cautious, sought understanding in Braveel's coffin room. There he found the listener rigid in trance, reciting a single line. 2 hands open, 1 hand bleeds. He petitioned for clarity, but no hearing came. When he left, a slender figure watched from alcove shadows. Mathieu Bellamont, a young Breton, newly elevated to speaker after the Sentinel debacle. Bellamont's gaze held the stillness of iced water, yet within flickered coals, LeChance would not perceive until too late. For Mathieu carried a wound deeper than poison. Years before, corsairs, hired by Uriel's private envoy, had murdered his mother, who had refused to cede farmland to an imperial road. Bellamont, seeking redress through provincial courts, met only delays. In desperation, he performed a crude black sacrament, blood of goat, doll of straw, and the Brotherhood answered. But the contract misfired. Without proper tenet guidance, assassins slew the wrong corsair, leaving the true killer untouched. Mathieu's grief curdled into hatred for the order that failed him. He rose through ranks with silent diligence, planning eventual vengeance not against his mother's murderer, long dead, but against the Brotherhood itself. Within months of Cheydinhall's purification, corpses bearing black handprints surfaced in cities where no contract had been sanctioned. A countess in Coral, an alchemist in Dawnstar, a primate of Julianos in Kvatch, each found slain in ways mimicking Brotherhood style yet laced with theatrics, eyes gouged to form 5-point star, tongues stitched shut with silver. The black, hand fretted, someone impersonated them, courting reprisal. LeChance volunteered to trace imposter trail. So began a hunt that would erode his own standing, for the forgeries led always to dead ends, clues planted as if knowingly. Meanwhile, anonymous scrolls reached the fingers of trust, accusing LeChance himself of orchestrating killings to mask greed. The scrolls bore cipher only Black Hand used. Fear whispered that the silencer had strayed. This climate of suspicion coincided with explosive events above ground. In the heart of Sun's Dawn, year 433, Emperor Uriel VII and his sons fell beneath red-robed blades of the mythic dawn, deep in imperial sewers. The Night Mother's children woke as if doused in ice water. Not only had they failed to intercept plot, but rumor immediately blamed dark assassins. Market criers shouted that the fabled Brotherhood finally dared regicide. Penitus Oculatus agents swept across Cyrodiil, dragging beggars and bards suspected of cult ties into interrogation halls. Sanctuaries sealed doors and doused candles, fearful that one tortured confession might unravel centuries. The listener sought guidance from the coffin. Again, only silence. Some said they heard faint weeping. In desperation, the hand convened. Beneath Fort Farragut, an abandoned garrison whose wine cellars had long provided Lucien Lachance discreet refuge. There, Bellamont unfurled forged proof, ledger snippets, counterfeit confessions, claiming Lachance masterminded both imposter murders and Emperor's death to elevate power. Lacking whisper from Mother, the Hand voted, Lachance must die by penance. He fled, pursued by dark riders carrying crossbow bolts dipped in spiderfish venom. Hideouts collapsed. Allies vanished. Within a fortnight, he stood cornered in Blackwood marshes, cloak tattered. He pleaded innocence. His pursuers answered with quarrels that sent him spinning into bog water, lifeless. Bellamont, having steered order to murder its own champion, moved next to Braville. There, at witching hour, he approached the crypt where Coffin rested. Alone, he spoke a black sacrament, unusual for an insider. Sweet mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear. The effigy on floor bore 5 small black stones, symbolizing each Black Hand member save himself. He sought the Night Mother's sanction to destroy the council, leaving him sole steward of new, vengeance-driven creed. Yet when he finished, chant, torches guttered not in welcome but rejection. Brass bands along Coffin's lid pulsed with cold luminescence. Bellamont felt weight upon lungs, as if the void itself leaned to hiss. Not yet. Denied but undeterred, he enacted mortal measures. False contracts lured speakers one by one into talk with so-called penitents. Each meeting ended in blood, staged, to implicate remaining council. The Black Hand, numbers dwindling, lost command hierarchy. They recalled purification doctrine with dread. Could entire order now be corrupted? Some considered burning the coffin, closing communion forever. But to harm Vessel risked erasing the mother's tongue from Mundus. Paralysis gripped them while Bellamont counted down pulse of vendetta. At this juncture stepped forth an unlikely thread, a nameless assassin of Cheydinhal reborn, sole survivor spared by Lucien in prior purification, either overlooked or saved by whim of void. This shadow lingered on fringes, indebted to Lachance, skeptical of Black Hand narrative. Shadow uncovered Bellamont's sigil within forged contracts, an almost imperceptible swirl in ink that mimicked drop of tear. The pattern broke only for those who knew to look. Armed with truth, the assassin approached the fractured hand, now reduced to listener Mar and speaker Arquin. They listened, horror dawning. They had murdered their own loyal silencer, accepted lies, severed trust with Coffin. Together they forged desperate plan to confront Bellamont within the crypt itself, before the mother's gaze. On a night of new moon, Shadow escorted Hand through catacombs. They found Bellamont amidst new sacrament, this time 7 effigies, representing every surviving brother. He turned, eyes alight with flame of grievance unmet, and drew blades, kissed by silver void alloy stolen from defunct rebels. Battle in crypt raged silent as nightmare. Air tasted of copper, edged with static. When final dagger fell, it was the Shadow who struck, plunging steel through Bellamont's breast. The Breton's gasp echoed off sarcophagus lid before fading into hush he once sought unravel. No cheer followed. The survivors knelt before Coffin waiting judgment. Then, for first time since Cheydinhal purge, lullaby rose, quiet, mournful, yet carrying note of forgiveness. Listener Mar collapsed, tears tracing dust paths on cheeks. At his urging, Shadow placed Bellamont's still warm heart upon coffin lid. Brass bands glowed, drawing tissue inside without scar. The mother, it seemed, accepted this final offering as balm, but acceptance carried cost. Of original Black Hand, only 2 remained. Sanctuaries in Falkreath, Riften, and Leowin sat empty or burned. The Brotherhood, so long an empire of hush, was now sparse nodes linked by faded thread. Ma, gaunt from ordeal, declared his final edict. The order must retreat into deepest shadow, rebuild slowly, accepting no contract unless it served true entropy. He appointed the nameless shadow new speaker and bid them carry Coffin north to Skyrim, far from Penitus Oculatus' eyes. Records after this moment fragment. What fragments survive describe small, tenacious circle beneath Falkreath's old cemetery, guided by matron Astrid, once lover bereaved at Cheydinhall, who embraced modified creed, family above void, profit above balance. Her branch would one day meet Dovahkiin blade and burn. Thus the Brotherhood entered its long night. Imperial chroniclers, perceiving only surface, wrote that Dark Guild faded after Uriel's fall, usurped by new intelligence agency called Penitus Oculatus. In truth, a skeletal lineage endured, Coffin travelling through snow-flurried passes, lullaby softer, yet unbroken. Novices dwindled but still learned opening couplet beside midnight braziers. Some listened to wind through tomb doors and swore they heard children's voices singing ancient nursery about 5 little fingers closing. They wondered if the mother wept for what her brood had become, or for what prophecy yet demanded. Above ground, Tamriel reeled, oblivion gates rent the air, Daedra marched, and heroes answered. In the chaos, few questioned where assassins walked. They walked seldom, discerning that in such open crisis, their blades were redundant. When reality itself bleeds, the void need not send further cuts. Instead, they observed archivists of carnage, not their own. Only when Mehrunes Dagon fell and smoke cleared did their daggers whisper anew, reminding survivors that even world-saving champions must one day cease, that balance after victory still tilts towards silence. Graduate scholars debate whether Brotherhood could have averted Oblivion crisis had their strength remained intact. The question misses essence. The Order does not exist to prevent ruin or hasten it, but to dramatize intimate certainty of end. What Oblivion taught the world, the Brotherhood has always taught individuals. Gate one city, barricade heart, with faith yet still final door opens into dusk. As Fourth Era dawned, new empires rose. Thalmor stretched long knives over Somerset. Dragons stirred. Among these upheavals, the Dark Brotherhood, splintered, chastened, half-remembered, lingered like scent of smouldered incense, faint yet impossible to dismiss. Somewhere a lone speaker knelt beside travel-scarred coffin, listening for lullaby. Somewhere a petitioner stitched nightshade petals and bone beneath flicker of hesitant candle. And somewhere a blade waited within folded cloth, its edge patient, its silence deep, recalling that fractures and purges change houses, but not the void. The void abides, and as long as names are spoken in desperation, the family of Hush will answer, walking out from shadow not with parade or anthem, but with softer step that history may overlook, yet destiny can never deny.